If you're not listening first part then click I cut ton I swear you addict. This novel number 18 chapter 18 Trust the Trade. The days that followed after his wonderful trade with Callisto were eventful to say the least. Instead of a repeat customer, he had somehow managed to procure a customer base. He didn't really care about the nature of their trade, as long as a trade was had. That was the whole thing. It was why the union existed. To give people what they wanted. So yes, he didn't really care about the fact that he was buying what could be argued as priceless, negatively literal, mutations. As already established, the lesser valuable things in his inventory would be sold off in bulk to other entities. Merchants weren't the only ones out there that dealt in some sort of interdimensional trade. Most times, the younger and small-time merchants lacked the capital to buy any meaningful bulk of goods from them, something that was both understandable and expected, and because the trade must go on, they then turned to other entities and organizations who were more than happy to buy off the leftovers in their inventory. While the Union was a massive organizational entity, it wasn't the only one out there, nor was it the largest. And besides, the Union wouldn't have been able to grow itself to its current behemoth existence if it only traded with itself. When merchants grew to a certain level, most of them were sought out by agents of other entities. And for Isaac, he had contacts of agents in two of, if not, the largest organizations in his sphere of influence. The Company and the Guild. These were the two of the oldest organizations out there, even older than the Union, and between the both of them, the Guild, with its chaotic code of conduct, was Isaac's most frequent customer any time he closed up shop. Even their agents were such mischief gremlins that their most preferred purchases were bad goods, the more damaged it was the better. A ring that summons a protective barrier but shaves away your lifespan with every use? Let me see that. Oh, this serum causes major biological deformity but grants slightly enhanced human capabilities? Not bad at all. A magical tattoo that causes horrific nightmares, cripples your immune system, makes you weak at night, gives you partial blindness during the day, moderately robs your sense of hearing and taste, attracts monsters towards you and makes them frenzied? Give me your whole stock and I'll put a down payment for the next one. The agents were just every bit crazy as their clients, but Isaac wasn't one to judge. As long as a trade was had, he didn't care about his customers' seemingly destructive tendencies. It was because of this certainty that Isaac wasn't exactly unwilling to buy the more defective X genes, as he knew exactly who he would be selling it to for profit. This wasn't to say that he didn't make a sale to Callisto, because he did. Yeah, she could throw around the icy glare and intimidating posture all she wanted, but there was no way she could hide the genuine interest, more like salivating intensity, when she saw what she could get from the small fortune she was amassing. Salamander Dagger, Lies of P, a fully upgraded dagger designed to make the embedded ergo generate overheat. It was created by alchemist defectors for a special purification ritual, which, good for them, they definitely needed it. Well, now you've got a super finely crafted dagger that deals intense fire damage with every slice. The dagger possesses an ignite function that drains more power from the ergo source to vastly increase its fire damage. Price, $6,820,000. To say she was one happy customer would be both a truth and a lie, because she expertly hid her reaction upon her purchase, but it didn't matter because Isaac could clearly see that oh-so-familiar glint in her eyes. That wasn't the only thing she bought. She just couldn't get enough of it, but at least she made sure to go for a practical choice. Mad-Eye Moody's Magical Eye, Harry Potter the ultimate replacement. A glowing electric blue magical eye that spins. If that is not enough, it also sees through walls, invisibility, as well as provides a 360 degrees vision. Price, $2,402,000. As if that wasn't enough, she also bought a nifty thing that she wrapped around the eye-catching eye. Tattered Mage's Cloak, Dragon Age this junk? It's just a torn piece of cloth with frayed edges and fading glyphs. It grants, at most, plus 5% to mana/stamina regeneration. Price, $7,380. Honestly, wrapping the tattered cloth over the magic eye, both to hide it and to supply it trickles of magic to boost its abilities, however minuscule the boost was a genius purchase in efficient use. Isaac had been pleasantly surprised by Callisto's ingenuity with that little decision. It also paired well with her X gene, which she had let him appraise, and was valued at $29 million, which gave her, not enhanced physicality and senses, but actual superhuman physicality and senses, along with superhuman reflexes, intuition and regeneration. If there was anything that Isaac loved about being a merchant was the scalable market and how erratically it could fluctuate depending on where he was. For example, the tattered cloak was literally just a piece of cloth he picked up from the ground in some ruined castle. The eye, now that required some patience to be able to get it for cheap. Nothing a good trade and batter couldn't fix, especially when he had a full shelf of rare magical tomes staring straight at the impressionable young boy. As for the dagger, well, that he actually paid for, but it was nowhere as expensive as he had to sell it. Less than even a fraction of it. It wasn't that he was purposely raising the prices through the roof. This dimension practically lacked a magical community which further increased the rarity of these kinds of items, like the eye and the dagger, as well as give value to a piece of rag. Those were the only things Callisto bought for herself, as she spent a tiny fraction of the returns from selling a few defective X genes to purchase things for her community, like bulk purchases of tents and blankets sets that filters the air, provides extra comfort and boosts recovery and rest with every session of sleep. He tried to interest her with magical seeds but she declined, citing that they lacked the soil and sun to properly grow them. Well, at least he got a few things that were sure to interest his roster of eccentric clients from the guild and the company. Anomalous fly mutation X gene, you are a fly. That's it. You are a human-sized fly. In fact, you're more fly than human. Except that, well, you can't fly, which is the only human trait you have. Trivia: a fly has a lifespan of 15 to 30 days, luckily for you, that doesn't apply to you. Unfortunately for you, you have a lifespan of 15 to 30 years. P.S. Never forget, you're a human-sized fly. Do with that information what you will. Vitiated polymerized biology X gene, you're made of plastic, down to your very cells. You effectively exhibit plastic-like traits on command, turn your body into plastic, and fuse with other plastics of the same type as you. You're polystyrene. Your breaking point is that of Tupperware. And yes, you break. And melt. On a less important note, every time you turn into plastic or exhibit its properties, it becomes harder to revert back. Use it too much and you'll turn into a plastic statue, which means you die in a pose. Choose wisely. Energy absorption X gene, you can completely absorb any type of energy into your body, and can also attract them towards you in a 10 m radius. Heat, cold, lightning, kinetic, gamma radiation, psionic waves, magic, dark matter, gravity, you are the perfect recipient of any and all forms of energy that no residue is left in your immediate vicinity after absorption. You also possess zero immunity or resistance towards these energies other than what your body naturally provides. Fire will burn you from inside out. Cold will drop your inner heat, ergo, you die. Lightning? New type of rare steak. Gamma, psionic, dark matter? If you survive, be sure to leave us a review. These three were not the only ones he got but were some of the best highlighters from the list of X gene he bought from Callisto and her Morlocks. They cost a fraction of what Mask's mutation cost, as even these three combined cost less than $150,000, but the addition of the bulk he bought did cost up to some pretty millions. All in all, it was a great trading session. The kids were happy, Callisto was happy, even if she tried to hide it, and Isaac was happy. The customer is happy, the merchant is happy. As for his other customer of interest, Mikhail, the big guy was still thinking about Isaac's recommendation of weapons and came in one day to appraise his X gene to see if it would help with the cost. The price of his X gene was so atrocious that he considered selling it for a brief second. He didn't, but the thought became familiar. Upon seeing Mikhail's internal dilemma, Isaac gave him his professional suggestion. For example, instead of getting the Yamato, he could get a one-use item to get where he wanted to go, and for the weapon, Murasame, Akame Ga Kill, Soul Split Katana, Jujutsu Kaisen, and Tesseiga, Inuyasha, were all good alternatives. Isaac rolled out a catalog of weapons within his X gene price range and effectively made Mikhail adjust his priorities. As for what those priorities were, Isaac was sure he would be seeing them in the near future. The Morlocks, in the span of a few weeks, had witnessed the kind of change none of them would have ever expected to see in their life. As a forgotten and unneeded demographic, they were well used to surviving by the edge of their teeth and playing with the worst set of cards life gave them, but the recent weeks has seen a stark change to that cosmic balance. Good tents that didn't leak and beddings that for the first time in a long time made them feel like they were sleeping on beds, good beds, not the bedbug-ridden and chopped foam some of them slept on. They had clean, crystal clear water and good healthy food down in depths of the tunnel under New York City. And that wasn't the last of it. Humans. They could be humans again. Most of them that had mutations that threatened their lives, affected their livelihood, and were downright cancerous had traded their mutation for a chance at life again. Mask was the first to do it, and even though it left mixed feelings with most of the Morlocks, it was a proof of concept that they could change their lives. Whatever they sold their mutations for, Callisto made sure that they donated a good part, a good 50% that is, of it to the camp, and the rest they could keep for themselves in case they wanted to go live on the surface or were saving it for a rainy day. If they decided that they wanted to go live on the surface, Callisto made sure that Dreamer erased all their memories of the Morlocks and implant fake ones. It was a little harsh, but no one could argue with Callisto against it, not even Mikhail, as they all knew the risks. For those that became humans but decided not to leave, well, nothing much really changed for them except adjusting to life without their crippling mutation, which was a positive step up all things considered. However, it wasn't without its own set of issues, as there were some of the Morlocks who saw the act of parting with their X gene as a betrayal to their identity as Morlocks. There was slight tension in the camp as the murmurs grew, and some started suggesting that they send all the humans back to the surface, but it was instantly killed in its infancy by a stern Callisto after the first altercation broke out. A very serious threat of forcefully wiping the memories of anyone who thought so and sending them up to the surface with their mutations shut up the last grumbles of dissent. It was either that or they gave her an excuse for her to use her new daggers on a person. Fortunately for them and unfortunately for her, the Morlocks knew her well enough to know when she was in a murderous mood, so they wisely swallowed their misgivings and kept it in their dreams. "What do you mean?" a rigid voice spoke through a speaker, and even though it remained calm and neutral, there was a natural sharp pressuring edge to it that pricked at the ears and the spine of the listener. "It's not clear yet, but something has clearly happened down there to bring about all this change. The news is fairly recent." "How certain are you?" the voice from the speaker asked, making the listener hesitate for a moment before giving their reply. "I can't be sure until I check it out for myself. Even if it's not true, there is no denying that something actually happened to spark such a rumor." The voice did not immediately reply, going silent for a few seconds, before responding after an irritated grumble. "Find out that it is and track it down," the voice ordered, and added after a short pause. "And be quick about it." They scoffed. "When have I ever been late?" "A rhetorical question, I'm sure," the voice said dryly, and promptly cut the call, eliciting a faux offended gasp from the former listener. "Rude," the voice said with personal amusement before clicking their tongue as a new irritation set it. "Now, what the hell is this about? Us/N, I put Callisto's X gene at 29 mil. At first I thought it was too expensive, but then I remembered that this is Marvel and saw that it was actually dirt cheap given that Cap's super soldier serum is a multi-billion fruit punch, and that no one in their right mind in Marvel would sell it for less. So in a way, it might seem that Isaac is actually ripping them off, and technically he is." Number 19, Chapter 19, How Did This Even Happen? The Average Daily Life of Peter Parker. Now that would be a catchy title for a documentary or a biography of his life, and would get the audience hooked on from the start, since it alluded without alluding to his life not being completely average. Extra points to the director if they managed to perfectly catch the transition between the average daily Peter Parker life and the dark unordinary secret of his life that the title promised without promising. It would automatically win a few Academy Awards if they stuck to the source material and added a few key Uncle Ben quotes in gray frames and somber music playing in low volume in the background at opportune timing, like when he found himself at pivotal crossroads and had to make a decision that drove his life further from average. Junior high school would be the formative arc in the initial introduction of the core characters. Here is where the trauma/character development stimulus and supposed genius intellect will be briefly shown. Where the expected path of his life will be foreshadowed, which also foreshadows the pivotal divergence. The template for his character will be exercised, nerdy, antisocial, purported genius, kind, pushover, which will lead to the most important arc, senior high school. The failed romance, the pining, the rebellious phase, the tragedy, Aunt May's cold pasta, the bullying, the letdown, the pushback, the accident, the realization, the choice. The audience will be left stunned as the tone suddenly changes and the dark cloud sets over. It will already be too late when they realize that the average daily life stopped some time ago. No mood will be allowed to settle in for too long, as they will keep changing things up with flashbacks every time a decision is to be made. The decisions will be the highlight of the whole thing. If the director needed a global recognition, then adding key visuals of Aunt May in at least 3 scenes of her perfect Sunday pasta was unnegotiable. If executed perfectly, it would earn a few nominations and at least 1 major film award. While it won't hit that legendary $1 billion summit, or even the $500 million greatness milestone, it would smash the box office in its opening weekend. At the end of the movie, people will trudge out of the theater in dumbstruck awe and ask themselves the same question Peter was likely asking himself at every point of the documentary. Like right now. How did I get myself into this mess? Almost a year since he got bitten by that one radioactive spider, and a few months of him officially being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, with the suit, logo and everything, and he'd been content with dealing with thugs, robbers, organized crimes and other no-do-gooders in small, normal Queens and its environs. He was perfectly okay with that. He had 0 complaints when dealing with thieves and criminals with guns. How did I get myself into this mess? He just hoped the documentary would get it right, because he had absolutely no clue how this even started. Why did he suddenly get a supervillain? Why before Christmas? And why did he look like the explicit content modern retelling of the Grinch? What did Christmas ever do to you? Guess who's still on the naughty list this year? He might have or not have joked about the Green Imp seasonal getup. That might also have been before or after he called the glider an inferior imitation and that it couldn't do what Rudolph did in one foggy night. Something might have happened around or between the statements, because he suddenly found himself crashing into a building and crashing into a family's lunch. He had hardly gotten himself off the broken table and was in the middle of an apology to the terrified family when they heard the maniacal laughter careening towards them. You even got the laugh wrong. Do your research. A web splurge covered the cosplaying Grinch's face as he flew over, and 2 stretched webs to either side of the broken walls shot him towards the blinded Grinch like a catapult. This is why no one likes sequels to classics. He punched the Jade Menace across the face, sending him flying off the glider, which didn't hesitate to do a small loop and fly towards its rider. I will fillet your flesh off your bones, insect. The open-budget Grinch roared, which caused Peter to hang his head low in disappointment from where he was perched on the side of a building. The Grinch doesn't roar. He snarls. Get it right, Peter shouted as he swung over with practiced flair. If you're going to pirate a classic, at least get the subtitles right. He shot a few web bullets, but the dude dodged them and rushed at him with his rebranded deranged cackling. Peter dodged the bull rush by hopping web strings, but this new guy was even faster as he surfed his glider in a sharp upward turn and cut the webs and caught Peter by the neck. Insignificant worm. The shrill anger was grating to Peter's ears, but he forced through it and the suffocating grip to croak out something of utmost importance. Your last words, perhaps? The weird elf asked with sinister glee. RCHDETR. Ha ha ha, be polite and speak loudly. The schizophrenic elf brought him closer, so Peter tried again with more force through the crushing hold on his throat. A spider is an arachnid. Get it right, you vermin. Arachnid. Peter croaked as the new local bully wound his other hand up for a gut punch, but Peter webbed up his face again and drew it in for a head, but that rattled his skull a little, like a tiny bit. The guy faltered and his grip weakened, but Peter did not instantly peel away as he instead pulled on the webbed head for another headbutt. This one did the trick as the hoverboard wobbled erratically as its rider lost balance. Peter wasted no time as he wounded up the Spider-Man special as he pulled away and webbed up a nearby wall and the intense cosplayer. Using the force of his swing, he grunted as the muscles in his other hand coiled as he used one hand to swing the guy into the wall of another building. The moment the guy slammed against the building, he started peppering him with a rain of web bullets and instantly cocooned him to the wall before physics did its thing. He landed on the wall and squatted above the masked head. Guess who's not stealing Christmas this time? Instead of snarling, or roaring as this pirated copyright did, the first phase boss started laughing, which raised Peter's hackles as he recognized that he just transitioned into a cut scene. His enhanced senses floored out and quickly drew his head to the whirring and clicking of the floating saucer. What makes you think you've won? How about this little gift to celebrate our first meeting? Two mini turret jutted out of the glider. Peter's spider senses that were ringing before started blaring, and then started shooting things into the sky. Pumpkins? Ha ha ha. The psycho continued laughing, but Peter had already kicked off the wall after the falling pumpkins as the pitched-up humming in this particular tempo of his spider senses told him that those were likely explosives. The laughter behind him grew even more deranged as it grew farther until it just stopped. The madman had escaped. Peter did not dwell on it as he webbed up 3 pumpkins and held it tightly against himself like eggs on sale. He kicked another one towards him as he swung by to web up 2 more. It was a tense midair juggle as he hurried to catch all of them as the humming turned into a high pitch. The last one had already bounced off a building and was falling over a crosswalk where people were gathered and watching him. Things like wind resistance and angle of elevation came easy and instinctive to him when he started swinging, so he didn't think too much about it and shot a web downwards that looked agonizingly slow to him even as it crossed the distance in a fraction of a second and grabbed the ticking pumpkin. A simple thought and the relaxing of his danger sense made him pull the bomb up and threw the web of pumpkin bombs up as well, just a moment before it blew up in a huge explosion whose resulting force sent him flying to the ground as a potential red splat, which he narrowly avoided by webbing up an exposed beam on a billboard and used it to bungee jump onto the roof of a nearby building. He waved down awkwardly as some people panicked, some cursed loudly, while some cheered at him. "What the hell, Spider-Man? You made me drop my burger. Warn a brother next time before you pull shit like this." "Sorry." Peter winced in embarrassment as he mouthed off a few apologies to the grumbling crowd before slinking away. His mind was fully on the worrying appearance of whoever that man was as he swung down one of his preferred alleyways and changed out of his suit. He winced at the welts that were on his shoulders, chest, and back as he threw on his shirt. The guy was strong enough that he was clearly enhanced in some way and psychopathic to boot. Nothing ever happens in Queens, so why would a villain ever show up here? And there was the level of tech. That was not something that could be knocked up in a section room that gave away a part of its birthright to be half the room it used to be but also allows it to function as an all-purpose science lab, nor was it built in the garage of an obsessed ambitious engineer. Those refinements were high-spec, and that meant equipment that had acronyms for names and cost millions of dollars at a minimum. This is bad. This is really bad. And here is the part where Peter Parker belatedly realizes that he unknowingly just took another step that strayed him further from an average life. If only he could have gotten something from their battle, like a dud pumpkin bomb or a part of the glider, that he could dismantle and start his search for clues. How did my life get to this point? He moaned in misery as he hurried back home. He was behind on 2 assignments and his attendance record was getting some splotches, and in return for the rising threats to his academics, the universe rewards him with a villain in the middle of the day and forced him to skip last period as well. The grim reminder watched with complete apathy as the group of lowlifes skittered into the empty building through the front door that they easily picked. To enable their sick gains, they had no qualms with killing anyone who they felt would be too much of a complication or might inadvertently lead the police into securing their arrest. The Punisher would endeavor to repay the favor. They would not live past this night. He watched as they all entered the house. He could read the sheer excitement that rolled off their body at what they thought would be an easy job since no one was home. He has been tracking them for days now, and today just so happens to be their unlucky day. He stepped out from where he hid in the darkness and strolled towards the house and entered it with a calm stride and silent footsteps. The first guy that was still lounging around the living room looking for something of value to pilfer was the first casualty of the night, and he should have been thankful for it. The Punisher covered his mouth from behind and snapped his neck without so much as a second thought. 1 down. 6 to go. The second one was coming out from the lounge adjacent to the living room and had a second to register the shock before his friend's knife kissed his throat. He fell with an ungraceful thump. "Day, is everything all right down there?" a concerned voice called from the second floor, but he got no reply, so he called out again. "Day, Beck, you guys all right?" The concerned man came out from one of the rooms and leaned over the railings to confirm what was happening downstairs. He gasped as he saw his two friends lying on the ground in the low lighting. "Goo, MMPH. Crack." The words hardly left his lips as someone covered them from behind and crushed his neck with a brutal twist. "Hey Donnie, what's up? Holy shit." The man who came out of the same room as the dead Donnie screamed and hastily raised his gun, only for his hand and a part of his stomach to be blasted off by the Punisher's shotgun. A commotion instantly kicked out and shouts and padded feet echoed from the other rooms, but Frank Castle didn't care about it and instead walked towards the screaming man that was trying to hold his stump and stop his guts from spilling out with one hand. He stepped on the man's stump, eliciting a shrill scream from the dying man, and leveled the barrel of his gun to his head. "Your guns. They look clean and expertly modded. Your supplier. Give me his name. Please, I didn't do, Ark." His gargling groveling turned into a tortured squeal as Frank pressed down his foot. "Name," he said again. The noises were near. He raised his head and raised his gun towards the bend of the hallway and mentally counted down. The moment a shadow flickered past it, his finger clamped down on the trigger and the new assailant fell down to the ground with brutalized legs. "Hector! Let's get out of here." But Hector, he's dead." "Let's get out of here, Drew." "He's dead. He's my brother." Frank looked down at the man that was slowly going into shock and pressed his foot down on the hand despite the weak groans. "Name. Pawn shop. Dre Kano's." Frank dispassionately stepped over the man who just fainted and ignored the other one with the busted legs as he was currently on his last breath. He turned back and went downstairs and walked around the house to catch the last two hopping over the small fence with their hustle slung over their shoulders in a black bag. He was completely calm and unhurried as he brought out a pistol and shot the both of them at their pelvis, effectively compromising their waist bone, i.e. their motor functions. They slipped down the fence with pain groans that came out as half whispers and half screams. 2 more shots to their shoulders stopped them from being able to grip their gun. There was no joy to be had in this, as he did not do it for vain satisfaction. Not for any moral justice or immoral revenge. He did it because he wanted to. Just the way they decided to kill and rob, so also did he decide to kill them. It was as easy as that. He used his foot to flip them over and leveled the gun at their heads, eyes dead and empty. Guns. Supplier. Name. Now. Why should we tell you, Ark? The bravado died prematurely as a bullet dug into his kneecap. 2 more entered his thighs for good measure. Name. Now. Why yes. I'll tell you. Just let us go. Name. Now. Frank said and reinforced his words by pointing the gun to the other unharmed leg. Junk in stuff. The man huffed with labored breath as feverish sweat coated his forehead and blood smeared his teeth. Off Queens. Small pawn shop. Isaac. That's it. Sweet, bang. Bang. 2 swift shots put both men out of their misery as the Punisher got the information he wanted and left. It would be minutes later before the cops showed up, but all they came to was 7 dead robbers. Number 20 Chapter 20 Be frank with meth. Punisher watched the nondescript pawnshop from when the sun was up in the middle of the sky to when the sun went down, even until it was total blackout and it was quarter hours to midnight. He already had the outside layout of the building seared into his mind. The supplier, Isaac, will not be escaping today. He had put an end to 2 other newly formed gangs that got their supplies from the man in the last 2 nights. The fact that all 4 of the bastards pointed to the same person made him almost certain that the information was golden. He wouldn't be certain until he confirmed it himself. He had watched kids, elderly and even suspicious people enter and leave his store throughout the day, and all it did was make him all the more angry and eager to put an end to this piece of living filth. Just like every criminal around the globe, he just couldn't be content with his honest trade and let his greed consume him. Well, today something else will consume him. He waited patiently, curiosity almost making him tail the suspiciously dressed group that just left the pawnshop, but he decided against it. He would interrogate the pawnbroker about who they were and also his list of clientele. He looked at the time, a few minutes past 10, and no one had gone in or come out of the shop in the last 10 minutes. It was time. He finished his fries and crossed the streets by melding into the crowd of people around him. Another good thing was that there were no security cameras in this area. His overcoat provided the needed coverage for the guns and knives strapped to different parts of his body, even the shotgun that was resting vertically against his spine. The stores around the shop and even the ones further down the street were already locked down for the day, which was another safety net. Even if the police were notified, it would take them no less than 10 minutes to arrive. 10 long minutes for him to retire as a long-lost ghost. He pushed the door slightly, well aware of the bell behind it, and grabbed the bell above him before quietly entering the shop. The door closed softly behind him while his hands tucked under his coat and pulled out his pistols. He looked around the corners and confirmed what he suspected, that there were no cameras. He turned around a corner, both hands held forward, and once again he registered no cameras as he stalked closer to the counter. Surely not. He could hear the voice of a man, probably Isaac, as he walked towards the last bend. Don't tell me, he whipped around the corner that put him face to face with Isaac, who was looking his way with a look of disbelief. That I'll have to start hanging up the sign. Can you please not? Isaac. Sir, I'll ask you to kindly put the gun away for your sake. The pawnbroker said with chiding disbelief. For my sake, huh? How funny. The chuckle that followed was a dark one. You reach under that counter and I'll put 2 holes in your shoulders, he said as he stormed towards the man who still thought he was safe. Isaac put down the book he was reading on the counter while his other hand dropped to his side and cocked a deadpan brow as 2 clicks sounded off. Frank's eyes twitched, but experience held him as he pulled back the gun and cocked them against each other, the weight telling him that, yes, they were fully loaded. He pulled the trigger again, eyes slightly widening, as he felt the gun jam. In a brief second, before Isaac could make any move, he holstered the guns to his waistline and pulled out the ones on his shoulder straps. He aimed them at the head and let them bang, but bang they did not. Okay, stop. The man finally said, putting a pause to Frank's motion that was about to uproot his shotgun from his back. Just for the facade of civility, I'll ask, what's this about? Frank resumed his motion, and in one swift movement, he was pointing the barrel of his shotgun at Isaac. The guns you've been selling. Who's moving them? Give me their name. Guns of those make that looked like the parts just came out of the factory was not just a simple black market deal. This was more than just arming petty gangs in the neighborhood. This was the work of a crime ring, the cartel, the mafia, hell, maybe even the triad. This was huge, and this man, Isaac, was one of the retailers. All these were signs that pointed at a war coming to the underworld, and he needed to know who were the ones pushing it. Isaac, on the other hand, looked less than impressed. If you're asking whether I sell guns, then yeah, they are among the many things I sell. My customers, I don't know most of them, and even if I did I wouldn't be telling you. I'm a merchant, not an info broker. As for my wares, I'm not telling you that. Trade secret. Frank seethed and cocked the gun. The only reason he hadn't blown out the man's brains was because he had no idea how he was jamming his guns. I would like to tell you that no manner of violence is permitted in this place. Your guns won't work, no matter what you do, Isaac said, not really feeling polite towards this extremely rude customer. Even Callisto did not behave this rudely. With that out of the way, I'll go ahead and ask while I'm still contemplating a full ban and a memory wipe. Do you want to buy something? What the hell is this place? Frank asked. He was as fearless as any man on their death road and just as cautious. He could already tell that something weird was going on. Junk and stuff. We sell all kinds of junk and stuff and everything in between. You sell guns to anyone that walks through that door? Frank asked sarcastically with a derisive snort. Isaac nodded with a drag as if it couldn't be any more obvious. If that is what they want, then that is what I'll sell them. What? He couldn't believe his ears. He laughed. It sounded raw and also like broken glass scraping against each other. It's all about the money for you, isn't it? Isaac blinked, looking genuinely confused at the question. He gestured to the store with his hands spread apart. I run a business. While it is my passion, it's also about selling as much as I can. So yes, in a way, it's still about the money. The Punisher started seeing red at the edge of his vision as he held himself back and gritted his teeth. And you don't care about the lives they ruin with it, don't ya? He decided in his mind that he was torture this man until he started begging for death, and even then he'll make it slow. I generally make it a rule not to inquire about the reason for my customer's purchase. The moral dilemma rises with what they do with it, not with me. I doubt who you bought those guns from asked what you wanted to do with it. I use it to put 6 psychos where they are supposed to be, the ground. You don't see me blaming who sold you those guns for your rude behavior, do you? Isaac looked pleased at the rhetoric. Now, if you're not here to buy anything, then I'll have to ask you to leave. And trust me, you wouldn't want me to make you leave. The names. I won't ask again. Isaac groaned loudly and slumped his shoulders to show just how fed up he was with all of this. With all due respect, fuck off, man. Click. Crack. Click. He deadpanned at Frank, who tried to shoot, failed, cocked the gun and tried again, only to fail again. Finally having enough of this, Frank fished his combat knife and rushed at Isaac, who just continued staring at him with growing disbelief. Isaac finally had enough as he saw Frank trying to jump at him over the counter and decided to put a stop to it. What is this? Frank asked, shock and utter disbelief coating his words as he was frozen midair. Isaac ignored him as he thought of what to do with his overly rude customer. There was at least one of these types everywhere he set down shop. They were practically a constant to the trade. A simple ejection or ban will have him come back and start harassing his customers. There was a harsher verdict should that ever happen, but Isaac preferred to completely prevent such a scenario. A mind wipe would save a lot of stress, and he wasn't such a slouch that he would leave holes in the memories. These were on the tamer end, and going further would, well, he didn't see a need. Frank looked at Isaac with his growing panic. What are you? Some kind of mutant? Not a mutant, unfortunately. What are you doing? Deciding what to do to you. Isaac said plainly. Well, mind wipe it is. I don't really care about your soul. Wait, this was a situation the Punisher has rarely ever found himself in. Why not just kill me, huh? I might find out about this place again. Isaac looked at him with raised brows. Are you that eager to die? If you are, then do it elsewhere. As for why, well, it's obviously because you kept being violent when I explicitly told you not to. That made Frank pause. You're going to erase my memories because I kept attacking, and not because I found out about your operations? Why would I do that because you found out about my shop? It was said in a way that suggested it was an obviously stupid thing to ask. Like I said, this is a business. Why would I be upset if someone found my shop? Frank's mind raced. The threat of his memories being erased put a genuine fear in his heart that he never expected it to. He couldn't risk anything happening to his memories. He couldn't risk forgetting them. And that fear became real when he saw the harmless-looking shopkeeper's eyes glow and started feeling dizzy. He grasped at anything he could to stop whatever it is that was about to happen. Wait. You said this is a business, right? You don't have a problem with who buys from you, right? He knew he was sounding desperate, but he just couldn't risk anything happening to his memories. It was the only thing he still had. Isaac paused but still looked impatient. Yes. I said the same thing a few minutes ago. Then I'll buy. As long as you don't touch my head, I'll buy from you, and I won't tell anyone. Frank was a prideful man. He was rigid and set in his ways and would wholeheartedly prefer death to changing his ways, he knew that. But every man had his weakness. And an oblivious shopkeeper just grabbed his. His hope cracked when he saw the frown that grew on Isaac's face. What do you mean you won't tell others? What part of running a business don't you understand? How am I supposed to increase my sales if you don't tell your friends? Huh? What? Isaac's irritation grew. Listen, man, are you buying or not? Frank looked surprised and relieved at the question, but he didn't let the question pass safely before he replied. I'll buy. Isaac stared at him for a few seconds, wondering if it would be better in the long run to just yeet him out and be done with it, but he ultimately sighed at the end as there were sales to be made. Fine, he said. But try this again one more time and I'll erase the whole file. Frank nodded as he was let down slowly. His back was drenched in sweat as if he just escaped the executioner's block. He slid his gun to his back and looked at Isaac with a new sense of caution. He was always a stubborn man, so he decided to risk it seconds after being cut off the noose. Just gotta ask first, he looked at Isaac, who reluctantly gestured for him to continue. Are you affiliated with any gangs or crime families? Just a yes or no. Isaac looked at the ceiling, existentially fed up with everything at this point. No. No. Just no. No gang or cartel or anything. He sounded as if he was physically forcing out the words from his mouth. Now, what the fuck do you want? Guns. Frank replied with zero hesitation. That admission was enough. He'll find out later just how truthful it was. What type? Frank hesitated for a moment before a ghost of a smile, a very dark one, wormed its way into his face. Surprise me. Number 21, Chapter 21, Punishment and Repercussions. Francis David Frank Castle has seen many things in his life. He has seen both the extremes of good and bad, and even things that did not fit into those convenient circles. He had seen good men die in the line of duty. He had seen the workings of vile men that labeled them nothing short of monsters. He has seen tragedy and caused tragedy. He had seen men do the impossible and had seen impossible men. He had seen men with enough power to single-handedly topple a country and had seen countries topple themselves because of the power of one man. In other words, Frank Castle has seen a lot of bullshit in his life, lived through them even, and what he was currently looking at did not lose out to the things he's seen in his short long life. The three things that Isaac, the merchant as he had called himself, had dropped in front of him were all outlandish, but the first and smallest one was the most outrageous piece of compact weaponry he had ever seen in his life. Lagavulin Mk2, Judge Dredd, a voice-activated machine pistol that serves as the standard-issued sidearm to judges. This multifaceted weapon is capable of firing a variety of ammunition from a single cartridge. This is the textbook definition of an efficient compact killing weapon. If you ever find yourself in a world where local law enforcement use this, just don't do anything stupid. For your own sake. Price, $11,500. He couldn't even begin to imagine what kind of madman created such a piece of weaponry and why they would ever think to make it the standard issue. The features were what truly made it outrageous. Now, Frank was no stranger to deadly weapons and firearms due to his time in service, but for a sidearm this was just too much. For one, it could be voice-activated, and according to Isaac, upon purchase it would be DNA locked to him so no one else can use it, and that was the most normal thing it could do. It could switch between different kinds of ammunition without needing to change the cartridge, and that was where the fun started. It had its own standard ammunition mode, and it could also switch between armor-piercing rounds, ricocheting rounds, incendiary, high-explosive rounds and gas rounds. And to top it off, it came with a heat-seeker mode that locks on the target's body heat. Arbitrator, Judge Dredd, a 12-shot shotgun capable of annihilating even well-armored enemies. It is capable of firing 7 different types of shell. This is the textbook definition of overkill. You shouldn't be doing crimes in the same zip code as the owner of this gun. This should be common sense. Price, $15,000. Like the lawgiver, it fired off the same types of shell, except for the gas rounds which it made up for by having a shell that targets multiple targets at once. It was just a shotgun version of the lawgiver Mk2, but he could somehow accept all these things being in a shotgun, not really, than being in a handheld pistol. Bulletproof vest, coat model, John Wick. A cutting-edge flexible, cloth-thin body armor is sewn into the padding of the coat. Unfortunately, it does little to nothing about the pain. Aesthetics are part of a killer's routine. You look good, you feel good. The extra handles for hidden weapons feel good. Your insides remaining inside feels good. What else do you want from a piece of cloth? Price, $10,000. The progression of the night had been straight weird, and it was so strange that this was the culmination of it. The three things that were in front of him, as a result of the night's progression, was so jarring a response to his earlier aggression. He had come here to blow up Isaac the supplier, the merchant, based on his understanding that he was selling guns to enable street crimes, only to find out that said man was indeed selling guns, but not to enable crimes. It was instead something much worse. He was selling it just to sell it. He didn't care who bought it. All he cared about was that he sold the weapons he had in his backrooms. And they were quite absurd weapons. Now, Frank Castle, as the Punisher, was an arbitrator of personal justice, retribution, and by the scales he judged every criminal with. Isaac's life was supposed to be a past tense by now, but that was something he couldn't do. It wasn't because the man's apparent stance was that of a staunch neutral given that he sold to anyone, but was because he couldn't even kill him. The fact that Isaac wasn't even concerned that he wanted to take his life and even came full circle to sell him some absurd weapons only made him that much more dangerous in Frank's eyes. And apparently he was also some kind of telepath, or whatever they were called. Frank was not cool with him or any such thing, but he could at least admit it in the bottom of his gut that he was relieved that the man didn't care that much. Now, as a self-proclaimed arbiter, he did not have the capital to procure these guns and coats. He could at most buy 2, and that would be him scrapping off his last cash. I would have bought that shirt off you for a pretty penny if you'd been at this for years. Isaac shrugged at Frank's confused face. Frank looked down at his shirt, the faded painted skull peeking out under the compact bulletproof vest he wore. This? Why? I also buy things I'm interested in. Things that have hidden value. Frank looked at him in doubt. Like painted military tee? Isaac just smiled. You'd be surprised. I'll still buy it if you want to sell it. He looked at the weapons. They were as tempting as the first night he put on that shirt and hit the streets. He wasn't one for golly sentiments, but he didn't feel like selling it. For the first time in a long time, that simple undershirt was the best thing that defined him. I ain't selling, he said tersely. He looked at the gun, the small one, and the coat. And these are legit? Frankie, I run this whole establishment on quality and trust. It works as advertised. If it doesn't, bring it back and I'll refund the whole thing and you get to pick out anything you want from the shop. That's the warranty on anything I sell. Frank scoffed. And who enforces that warranty? If I don't, someone will. Isaac said with all seriousness. Frank didn't put much stock in those words, but he held it to a degree. The only thing he knew was that there was no way someone like Isaac was pushing it on his own. He probably had a boss or someone that was supplying him with this stuff. He picked up the lawgiver and tested the way it felt in his hands. It was a little big and heavy compared to other small firearms, but it wasn't something that would hamper his marksmanship. He ran his fingers over the hem of the folded coat. If he did this, he didn't even know what would happen. You're not going to track me with these? He looked at Isaac, doubt clear across his face. If you don't want to buy anything, then just get out and stop wasting my time, man. I'm not forcing you. Isaac said with the groan of a man who had given up and was hoping that the universe was not as cruel as it seemed to be. Just go. He sighed. Frank nodded solemnly, seemingly taking Isaac's broken will as proof of trust, and pulled out his card. I'll take the lawgiver and the coat. Isaac looked at him as if he couldn't comprehend Frank's decision-making pattern. He did not bother wasting any more of his brain fluid and just smiled, a relieved and vindicated one. The universe truly wasn't as cruel as he feared. He took the card and swiped it with a self-satisfied smirk and returned it. "Want me to package it for you?" "No need." Frank shook his head. "I'll be taking it for a field test." "Of course." Isaac smiled and pushed them towards him, just happy enough that he made the sale. "Now don't be a belligerent douche and refer us to your friends, if you have any." Unfortunately, Frank couldn't say anything about the terrible manners since he was the one who first fired the gun, both metaphorically and literally. He removed his old coat and threw in the new one and instantly noticed how comfortable it was and how it fitted smoothly to his body. It was so comfortable that it felt uncomfortable. It was a quality of fashion wear that he was not used to wearing. He never would have thought that he would ever spend $10,000 on a piece of clothing, but here he was. He looked too put together that he felt disgruntled about it. The gun was married to his hand as he studied the make and compartment of its build. User DNA identified. Voice command is now activated. The gun came to life. He could feel the faint humming on his fingertips. "Ammo? Got them in supply, unless you know how to make them. 10 mags for the discounted price of $4,500. Later." "Sure." He redistributed his guns, but not before checking every magazine and trigger to make sure it wasn't jammed. It wasn't. He did not linger, leaving the second he got his tools all fitted, not wanting to stay any extended duration in close vicinity with Isaac. Cold breath left his lungs as he closed the door behind him. He had been so close to having his head messed with, and he had found out for the first time how much that possibility scared him. He wondered why the panic he felt inside the store was not as intense as the one he was currently feeling. His legs were shaking and his breath came in stops. His heart hurt against his chest and his fingertips were cold. Did I just buy a gun and a bulletproof coat in this condition? He thought, half astonished and half in dread. Compared to his current breakdown, his mind had felt too clear to the perceived threat that being inside the store and standing in front of Isaac presented. His training and discipline kicked in a little too late as he forced himself into a semblance of balanced calm and put some healthy distance between him and the store. Despite everything, he didn't feel like retreating for the night. If anything, he felt strongly that some scum bastards out there needed to pay. The night was still young. There was still a list of punishments to dole out. Camartage, the Ancient One, sipped her tea on top of a floating carpet as she watched the acolytes go through their training in the courtyard below. Her face, set in an impassive mask, hid the deep contemplation that was going through her mind as a result of her recent actions. She was coarsely familiar with actions and consequences, so she knew that she had to make some preparations and take healthy precautions to stave off the brunt of the consequences that was sure to blow her way. For weeks she could feel Dormammu banging against the dimensional barriers in a fit of unbridled rage, but she had nothing to worry on that front. What she had to prepare against would be the trickles of his influence that had undoubtedly managed to slip through. She knew he would be prodding her soon to find out exactly what she did, so she had to watch out for the increase in demon activity, cultist activities, and the more subtle possession. Well, I must have been quite eager back then. Not one of my finest moments, she said softly in reply to the shuffle of her carpet. Who knows? Maybe you'll have the chance to flap your lapels beyond these walls. She let out an amused chuckle at the excited shrill it let out. Master. Someone greeted in heavy respect as they came to her side. Master Caecilius. She put down the teacup and turned to face him. What is it? We picked up some strange infernal activities in Ouagadougou. We checked the barriers, but there was no leak. Master Arno and I, along with some of the senior acolytes, will be going to see what happened. She looked at Caecilius, one of her most promising students, and looked at the students training down below. Whatever it is, I trust you enough to handle it. She sighed and gave a helpless shrug after he bowed and left. She picked up her cup and gave a pleased hum as the rich taste soothed her mind. I guess there are some things that are hard to change. How grating. As the keeper of the time stone, the constraints of time and fate, destiny, always humbled her whenever it let her witness its unfurling. In the end, we'll do what we can. The carpet thrummed in understanding under her. Number 22 Chapter 22 Sheesh, try to take it easy. Mystique walked through the camp with a practiced gait, not her usual saunter, and headed towards the cooking area with the lazy drag of an annoyed adolescent. Are you on lookout this morning? Beatrice, one of the older cooks with a skin texture that looked like tree bark, asked as she came into the secluded area. Mystique mumbled. Don't look so glum, Terry. You know the morning shift is the easiest, at least that's what Richter says. Your food is over there. Tell Danny not to lose his spoon again. Beatrice pointed at the stack of takeout sitting on top of the drum of water. Mystique grunted in thanks as she picked up the food and left the kitchen. Her current disguise was one of a petulantly lazy boy who hardly spoke, a perfect disguise. The poor boy's mutation was that he was a living battery and everything he did drew from that battery, even speaking. He could draw more energy from this internal battery to boost any aspect of himself, but the drawback was that he grew sleepy the more he drained it, that and the energy capacity of his battery was extremely limited, that it could hardly keep him up for 24 hours with little to no physical exertion. It was why the boy was so intentionally lazy and silent, and also why Mystique decided to use his appearance for her infiltration. She observed the camp as she walked through it. New beds, new tents, new clothes, clean water, a storage full of food and a cabinet full of medicine, and also some interesting security measures. She noted all these and more subtler ones, and the question came back to how. If she wasn't keeping a lazy eye on the Morlocks' activities, then she would have thought that they recently came across a lucky stash, or the most possible one, they somehow acquired a sponsor or a benefactor. She knew for a fact that it wasn't Charles or any of those sycophants from the club. Maybe they came across an open will? She joked in her thoughts. Well, she didn't really care about it. If anything, she was glad that they were doing really well for themselves. That would have been it, and she would have given Eric a boring report and the two of them would have been done with it, except for one teeny tiny factor. Some of them were humans, and she didn't mean that in a general way. Some of them were no longer mutants. It was that tiny fact that changed this from a boring recon to an emergency revelation. Some of them had lost their mutation and yet they looked happy. They were living better off from it. Mystique did not for once think that there wasn't a relationship between the lost mutation and the camp's sudden wealth. It was such a jarring thought to her that she did not know where to start from. If that was how she felt, then she knew without a doubt that Eric would see it as a taboo. The danger lay in the implications. Were they giving up their mutation for some sort of cure and using the compensation to fund their camp? Her thoughts were rather vibrant as she lazily walked past the camp and headed towards the exit tunnels carrying takeouts. I thought I warned you and yours not to come down here. Give me a good reason not to kill you here right now. The dagger that was pressed against her neck wasn't Callisto's usual daggers, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. The big guy will be angry, she said easily, even as the dagger pressed and threateningly to draw blood. I fear Magneto, but not enough to not kill you for sneaking around my place. The dagger angled seductively over her sound pipe. And wasn't that the whole reason why she hated coming down here? Callisto was a downright crazy woman, and Mystique did not for once doubt her word. Callisto was a very dangerous woman even from afar, something Mystique knew from experience. To have her sneak up on you was another type of danger, and unfortunately it was one that was hard to avoid. Oh, what she wouldn't give to see her current captor run circles around that red-headed bitch who stupidly thought she was the best there ever was. Now, no need to involve the pointies. Come on, Callisto, I was just doing some harmless snooping around. And look, she raised the packaged food in her hand. I was even going to bring your boys some food. I'll ask for the last time, Mystique, why are you here? Callisto asked, ignoring Mystique's failed attempt at humor. Mystique raised both hands in surrender. She wasn't stupid enough to pick a fight with Callisto. She wouldn't do it out there in the open, and she wouldn't think of doing it in here. They both knew that the feral leader of the Morlocks was just looking for a reason to skin her, and they both knew that she could do so with relative ease. I thought you guys were behaving weird. No new jobs, and yet you were buying a lot of food stuff. He told me to check it out, but whatever I expected was not what I found. She breathed easier as the knife around her neck retreated. She turned around slowly to face Callisto and noticed the new changes. A rag over her eye patch and a glowing dagger. Cool. You mind telling me what's going on? Magneto would want answers. Callisto scoffed as her lone eyes stared at Mystique in a way that made the polymorph uncomfortable. Then he should find his own answers. I don't care about what Magneto thinks. My Morlocks answer to me, and I don't answer to him. Mystique frowned. Callisto, he would want to know if you're he's the last person to lecture me about endangering mutants. Callisto cut her off. I'm putting my people first the same way he does his boy band. If they lost their mutation, then it's because they wanted to. I don't take that choice from them. But nothing. Callisto cut her off again. If anyone is in danger, then it's just us down here. I don't see how that is any of his business. This will be the last time you sneak into my house, Mystique. Mystique sighed in relief as she saw Callisto sheath her strange glowing dagger and turned around to leave. She asked one last question at the retreating woman. Then will you tell me who it is? No. Callisto replied without stopping and promptly disappeared into the darkness. As always, Callisto was a very hard woman to talk to. No amount of history between the two of them changed that. How did she track me? Mystique's mask turned solemn as she picked up the food and continued her departure. When did she start tracking me? She dropped the food near where Terry was sitting half asleep and slinked out of their tunnels. Her thoughts were undoubtedly on the ex-mutants down in the tunnels. She and her group, along with other mutant groups, did not have good history with ambitious men wanting to make mutant cures. It never brought anything good, and usually caused the most public altercations between mutants and the government. She knew for a fact that Eric wouldn't like this. She too didn't like this. Yes, the Morlocks never involved themselves with anything happening above ground and stayed removed from everything else, but this was such jarring news that she was certain that the few people who knew about the Morlocks would not respect their isolation and come to seek answers. And just like Callisto said, the Morlocks didn't listen to anyone but her. It was ugly business, she knew, and though she hated it, that was the way it was. Whatever it was, she knew the last thing anyone wanted was for Eric to come down and start asking questions, and further escalating and exacerbating a manageable situation. She would have to keep a closer eye on them and see if she could figure out who was responsible for the cures. The last few months for Jessica Jones was nothing short of a success story. Her career and reputation as a PI was experiencing a good upward trend that left her so content with herself, not just because of moral justice but also because of the payment increase. The adrenaline boost was also one of those things, and it was even more potent because sometimes she never knew when one case led to another or how far it could escalate. She even ended up working alongside some undercover police detectives on 2 different occasions. The last case she worked on with the detectives escalated so quickly that she had to use her Estus on them to save their lives after they almost got blown up in an elaborate trap. From cheating spouses to smuggling rings to off-site mutant experiments. The bounce between ranges was so absurd and spontaneous, but she wouldn't have it any other way. She looked at pearl-sized cameras and the silicone mask. She owed most of her success to these bad boys. They made infiltrating and spying on a location way easier than it should have ever been. They had their own limits and she was aware of them, but personally they had more than paid for she spent for them. Jess, why is your place like this? She groaned as she closed her drawers and turned to face her sister. I clean up. The way she said it was not entirely believable given the look on Trish's face. You know how it is. Sometimes I spend the whole night outside and when I come back I'm too tired to clean. Trish placed her hands on her hips and tilted her head to look at Jessica and let her expression tell her exactly what she thought of her excuse. You're not tired now, so clean up. Jessica deadpanned at her sister, who was still trying to play the strict one despite the both of them being adults. I'll do it later, Trish. I have a short errand to run, she said as he picked up a shirt from the bed and turned around to put it on. She wanted to make a quick stop at Isaac's and restock her Estus Med and maybe browse through his catalog to see if she could buy one or two things to make her job even easier. "Nope," Trish said with a shake of her head. "You can do that later. And besides, I want us to clean up together. So take off that shirt and pick up a broom or something." Jessica looked at her sister who was smiling at her, and despite wanting nothing more than to head towards Queen's, she relented with a groan and changed into something better for cleaning, while Trish smiled like she did on TV, except this one was a little wider by a millimeter. "Thank you," Trish said and then pointed at her room. "Maybe take care of her first before coming out." "I'll be in the kitchen." "Fine." She grunted and started picking up and separating the clothes scattered all over her room. Isaac's shop wasn't going anywhere, so she could do that later after cleaning up, as Trish forced her to do. Frank stared at the gun in his hand. The Loggever MK2 was a very apt name because Frank had been a bit skeptical of its performance, but all that changed the moment he pulled the trigger for the first time. Obstacles hardly posed a problem when the gun was involved. He quickly found out that his favorite combination was the gas round and the heat-seeking bullets. The only thing he had against it was the bullets. It was custom-made, and the only place he could get it was at that damned place. Well, needs must. He looked at the gun and nodded to himself as it convinced him of whatever decision he came to. He didn't get a chance to test the coat, and that was okay. It meant he was yet to make a mistake. The same mistake that those scums made by getting shot at. He was in no rush. If Isaac was to be believed, then he wouldn't have to worry about getting new weapons. He would familiarize himself with this one before he'll go for the shotgun or any other monstrosity that the man had. Sooner or later he'll find that bastard and give him his personal dose of punishment. Number 23, Chapter 23, A Good Day to Be in a Good Mood. Isaac was having a great day. No, it was more apt to say that he was in a great mood for the day. There was no real reason for it, none that he could see, or it could be that he woke up on that figurative right side of the bed, which was where he actually woke up on. He hummed an upbeat tune he learned from a hermit clan on one of his treasure hunts. It was such a catchy tune that it stuck to his head with such clarity even after many years had passed. Some of the boys were getting feisty, but that was all they did. He saw the Necronomicon telling the frozen statue a story in whatever forgotten language they were communicating in. There was that brief moment of panic when he realized that Schrödinger had stepped out of his box and started existing, but that was easily taken care of when he saw the stupid cat scratching some sort of grand transmutation circle around the shining trapezohedron on the ground. Who even taught the cat how to draw? His first suspect was the frozen statue, but, well, it was frozen. He stuffed the cat back in the box and left the statue to its riveting conversation with the Necronomicon, idly noting that Ivan's little book had joined them. He remained in that great mood as he opened up shop for the day and started his cleaning routine. There was hardly any need, as the Spectres kept his store clean at all times, but that was no excuse to not engage in his hobbies. The shop was squeaky clean in 30 minutes, after which he happily took his time in arranging the chaotic order of how things would be displayed today. He could have left these to the shop to take care of, which he did on most days, but he decided to do it today because he felt like it. He slid to his spot behind the counter at exactly 10 a.m. and pulled out 2 books which he was interested in using to pass the time. One of the books had a blinded eye on both sides of the cover, while the other had skeleton limbs across it. The moment he sat down to resume his reading, the door to his shop was pushed open, as signified as the ringing bell and the flying invisible specters that flew all over the store at every second. "Welcome to Junk and Stuff. What do you need?" he asked the kid who stood in front of him. The teenage boy looked similar to a group of mages he met a long time ago. They weren't the most memorable bunch, but somehow he remembered them. The beaten-down hair dyed black, the black lipstick and eyeshadow, the black nails and piercings, the black drab that was apparently a fashion statement, along with the heavy metal accessories, the picture-perfect emo boy. The boy looked at him with that sluggish tilt kids like him always adopted, like a character design, and opened his mouth to speak only to pause as his eyes caught something from the corner of his eye. He left Isaac at the counter and made a beeline towards one of the shelves at the back of the shop that had books and voodoo dolls displayed on it, where a red-haired female doll with round button eyes and a triangular stitched nose sat on top of the shelf and was looking down at him. The boy picked up one of the books, mumbling some "I can feel the darkness" or something along those lines as he traced the corners of the book with his fingers reverently. He opened the book, Isaac letting him do so, and gasped softly at the array of texts and diagrams he couldn't understand. He closed the book, hesitated for a second before grabbing another one, and walked back to Isaac. Isaac eyed the boy and the books with a small smile. "Just out of curiosity, do you know what these books are?" "Magic," the boy said softly in self-assurance. "Magic?" The boy met Isaac's eyes defiantly. "Superpowers, aliens and gods exist. It is foolish to believe magic doesn't exist." He said it with the same confidence of someone who claimed what should be common sense and yet everyone ignorantly disagrees. "So, interested in the occult, are we?" Isaac asked as he picked up one of the books and flipped through the ancient pages. The boy made a non-committal sound, drawing close to the limits of his social skills. "Maybe, yeah. I know there is a secretive magical community. If I can't find them, then all I have to do is prove magic is real and learn it myself." Turns out that his social battery was only limited to things that were not in his interests. "And you want to buy these because I can feel something from it. I am half certain that it is a real magic tome. The text looks too sophisticated to be fake and the pages are really aged. The darkness is strong with this one." Isaac looked impressed at the occult-obsessed teen as he tapped on the cover of the book. "And this one?" He pointed at the other book the boy had picked up. The boy looked up at him with smothered, black-painted eyes. "Magic draws those who are kin. It unravels itself to them in time. So you just picked it up because you felt like picking it up? You don't choose magic. It chooses you." "Heard that one before," Isaac mumbled. He placed one book on top of the other as he addressed the boy. "You know, rather than buying magic grimoires you don't understand, wouldn't it be wiser to know your affinity and talent in magic?" The look the boy gave him was a look he had given a lot of people who were just too ignorant to understand. "I don't need to," he softly muttered under his breath but with absolute confidence. "Magic chose me, and the darkness beckons." The amusement on Isaac's face became more pronounced. He was certain that the boy was one of those kids who took the occult as a fervent hobby and would scribble circles on the ground in the darkness of their room with lit candles and start chanting in some archaic tongue, probably Latin, while trying to summon a demon and bind it to them. On the other hand, they were very passionate about it in a way that made it hard to ridicule them. Be that as it may, he looked down at the two books the boy picked, Book of Gul'dan, World of Warcraft, and the Dark Arts Compendium, Feudal Hearts, and continued, "None of these are beginner-friendly, not to mention that they are not cheap." The boy leveled him an unimpressed look that said, "I know you're trying to cheat me, but it won't work. I'm not new at this. $40. For the two of them." And it came with a deadpan. An emo deadpan. If anything, Isaac was entertained. He slid the compendium forward, 40, and pushed the dark book along, 200. The boy's eyes widened beyond their lazy limit, casted by astonished anger. $200? Who would buy this for 200 million? KS? Huh, what did you say? Isaac pointed at the compendium, $40 million, and tapped the spell book, $200 million. The boy gave a very disappointed sigh. He felt insulted that Isaac would just straight out insult him like that because of his hobbies. He had thought Isaac of all people would know not to insult people's hobbies given he ran a pawnshop and sold magical books. "You know what? Just forget it. I'll go drop these." Any rapport that had been built between them had disappeared because of Isaac's insensitive joke. However, Isaac was still in his good mood, so he decided to see how he could push. "Is that it? Not gonna even haggle or call me out? I would if you wanted to sell," he said petulantly. "And who says I don't?" Isaac asked. "If magic is real like you say, what makes you think it would go for $40? That doesn't mean anyone would sell it for 200 million, or even buy it." Isaac's reaction to his words were a single raised brow that said, "Really? And besides, are you really trying to tell me that these are real magic grimoires? Do you really believe them to be?" Isaac remarked with a smile that was met with a deadpan. "Even if I did, that doesn't mean I would throw millions at it." The reply was laced with a silent duh that did a poor job at remaining unseen. "Aha!" Isaac snapped his fingers with a smirk on his face. "But it's magic. Think about it. Would you really give up on magic if you had the money?" The boy frowned and turned fully to face Isaac with the posture of a depressed shadow. "Still, that would only happen if the books were real, and who says they are not?" Isaac interjected. The boy frowned, his earlier displeasure making a guest appearance. "I'm not 12. And who says magic isn't real?" Isaac asked as if his question just made his whole point. The boy hit his lip, looking disgruntled at the insistent point. "Even if it is, I don't have the millions to spend on it." "True," Isaac mourned in disappointment but soon pivoted to a knowing-eye smile as his good mood dictated, "but that doesn't mean there is nothing you can do. For starters, what is your budget? Are you for real?" The boy asked in abject disbelief. Despite everything, it ended up circling back to Isaac trying to sell him a magic book. Before you say anything, I want you to tell yourself that you are buying a real magic book, not because of your hobby or anything, but because you are about to start your magic journey. With that train of thought, I want you to think about how much you are truly willing to invest in your dreams. It could be because Isaac was that charismatic and persuasive, or because the boy was just happy to have someone regard his occult obsession as something more than a hobby and didn't mind role-playing the bit, but he actually took a second and looked to be seriously contemplating it. 500. He finally replied. $500. That's all I got. Give me something good, please." Isaac smiled with a nod. "Why, of course." His good mood being the sole reason, he made a grabbing gesture with his hand, and folded sheet of paper, old yellow paper, appeared in his hand. "Wah. Now this is a page from a first-year textbook on magic, specifically on how to sense your magic, how to get it active, and how to find your magical flavor. The ingredients are quite easy to get. Follow the instructions, and if it works out for you, then, congratulations, you have some potential." He handed it to the stiff, shocked teen who looked like he had just seen a nuke go off, alternating between shock and disbelief, as he took it with shaky hands. "That'll be $370, by the way." Wah. "How?" "Oh, it's the real thing. Trust," Isaac said with a look of pure self-gratification. "You're not shitting me? This will. It'll teach me magic?" "It won't teach you magic," Isaac quickly corrected, and quickly added, "it'll show you how to feel your magic if you have any." Under the intense stare of the captivated emo teen, another book appeared in his hand after a little puff of smoke. "This is what will get you started on magic. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, by Miranda Goshawk, Harry Potter, the standard first-year textbook to get you started on magic. It doesn't make you Merlin, you wish, but it keeps the peppy kids happy as they focus on their little spark shows. Price, $1,150. Get your magic checked up first before you come for this," he said as the book disappeared from his hands, which visibly caused the boy to wilt. The boy looked at the piece of paper in his hands, looking extremely torn about spending a huge chunk of his meager savings on a piece of paper. This was different from spending a couple bucks on smartly printed books that pandered to the niche nerdy soul. If he did this, then he was stepping out of the realm of finding proof that magic is real and outright saying that magic is real. Maybe this was the final push he needed. If it was true, then magic was real. If it was fake, then maybe it would be the final push he needed to listen and drop out of this phase for good. "I'll take it," he said with the grim determination of a man staring at the crossroads of destiny, or with the gaze of an emo teen spending his only savings to prove that magic was real. "Wonderful. I do hope you come back again," Isaac said as the boy made a transfer that set him on an irreversible road. The boy tucked the piece of paper inside his jacket with extreme care and turned to leave. "I never got your name, kid." Halfway in his turn, the boy stopped and gave him a side glance with a smile on his face. I will give you my name when next we meet, after I answer the embracing dark of magic's call. The boy left after his grand declaration, leaving Isaac once again alone in his shop. What a great kid. Number 24, Chapter 24. Why, just why, Mystique lounged on the feather-comfortable piece of expensive furniture as she narrated everything she had seen in the underground Morlocks tunnels to a perpetually frowning Magneto. This thing is even more comfortable than my bed, she thought, even as her mouth parroted out her latest/least favorite experience. That woman is quick to forget her place, the master of magnetism remarked in displeasure when he heard of Callisto's decision and vague warning. Mystique's eyes narrowed. There is no place she forgot, Eric. She and her Morlocks are free to do what they want, and what they do is no one's business. Just as it's not their business what you do. Eric's eyes narrowed at her from the slit of his helm, but Raven held it as her golden yellow stared back. Eric reclined into his chair, his eyes looked like crescent frowns. What are you trying to say, Raven? We just let them do whatever they want and only react when it comes to stab at our backs. Her head tilted to one side while her raspy voice flowed out like a draping silk gown. It seems to have been working out so far, so I don't see what's the problem. She almost sighed as she felt the minute vibrations that vibrated through the furniture into her spine, working a knot that had been particularly stubborn. What I'm trying to say is that we will find out what they are doing, but we'll do so in our own way. We won't inconvenience them with our own problems like they don't inconvenience us with theirs. Eric's quick retort was stifled at the last part of Raven's sentence, but he made it clear that he didn't appreciate her tone. They knew about the Morlocks, that was true, but what made it an ugly joke was that none of them did anything for the underground dwellers. Eric himself had told Raven back then that they won't interfere with their way of life, the new one they've found, so as not to drag them into their own war. It was a good reason back then, and still a good one right now, but the promised non-interference was supposed to go both ways. At the end of the day, the Morlocks were just tired and unfortunate mutants who had come together to form a sanctuary, and they had done so without asking anyone for anything. Eric had no right to demand anything of them, and that was what Callisto made clear. Someone is out there curing mutants, Raven. Do you want me to spell out the danger of such a thing? Eric asked in a low voice without any of his magnetic charms, and it made her skin bristle. His words brought flashes of nightmares and other such images to her mind. She scowled. He was good at poking the proverbial big red button and making it look like the obvious truth. He was not one for petty lies, but he was very much one for painful truths. Like I said, we'll find out what they are doing without involving them in any meaningful way and risking them becoming exposed. She said as she stood up to leave, no longer interested in keeping her old friend company, regardless of how heavenly his couch felt like. She got to the door and froze for a second because of the question that he asked. How did they look? Were they? They looked happy. She remembered the faces of the humans at the camp, both old and young, and the easy air they kept themselves in. More than that, they looked content. They were satisfied. It felt like someone punched the air out of the room and left a gaping wound of oppressing silence. She didn't say another word and left Magneto to his contemplation as she closed the door behind her. She left the hidden base and came to a clearing where she just spent a few minutes looking up at the sky. What a shitty thing. Whatever she meant by that, only she could know. In a spacious office in some high-rise building in the middle of New York, with roof-sized window panes and curtains that draped down from the ceiling, a burly blob of a man sat on the only desk that was inside the office. Wilson Fisk. The Kingpin. In front of the seated mass of a man, and creating a stark image because of the disparity, was a lanky man in a neatly pressed suit, holding a folder in his hands. James Wesley, criminal lawyer, ambitious politician, eager participant, opportunistic nerd, personal assistant to Wilson Fisk and the right hand and confidant of the Kingpin. He read through his reports to his burgeoning mass of flesh of a boss with the smooth slick voice of an efficiently corrupt lawyer. Fisk remained silent as the report went on, twirling the pen around his fingers while his eyes crinkled at every bullet point that was read out. The guns, James. He almost growled. Almost. It was such a close thing. James adjusted his glasses with a finger with the composed posture of someone who greenlit an extensive torture session in the middle of a business deal. Every trickle of news we've been hearing about this supplier has died down. Most of the gangs that got their guns from this source have been found dead. I believe someone is actively suppressing this news, sir. Of course someone is suppressing it. Fisk grunted as the dancing pen in his hand broke. They probably got a hold of the supplier and started muzzling down every loose end. We need those guns, James. James gave a crisp nod. He reached into his folder and brought out a paper and slid it to his boss. The boys at the station sent some our way and we took them apart. James' glasses tilted as he gave a face smile. You were right, sir. The make is the same but the model is new to the market, and it already outperforms most of our guns with similar models. Fisk went through the report and the images of the dismantled gun with a glint in his eyes and a frown on his face. Even the screws look new. The springs are still shining. The entire manufacture of this gun is less than a month old, and it's currently untraceable in any law enforcement database. James Wesley wisely kept his mouth shut as Wilson Fisk intensely studied the gun with the same kind of eye to detail that helped him raise his career to his current level. Invisible guns, James. He smacked his lips as his thoughts raced at the opportunity. We are looking at a personal work. It is identically detailed but I'm certain that every piece was made by the same person. This is a professional gunsmith, James. A gunsmith that is essentially a ghost. But even ghosts have needs. James Wesley once again admired his boss' sharp wit and strategic mind. I'll redouble the people we've got looking out. In the meantime, what do we do about the guns in the police custody? The boys said that the importance of the gun makes it difficult to slip out of storage without causing an alarm. The big man waved his hand dispassionately, not at all caring for the problem or even seeing it as one. Then we'll get them to move the guns and hit the transport en route. James nodded and scribbled something on his notepad. Before all that, I want the gunsmith found. And I want him making my guns. Double his price if you have to. Get him under my coverage before he's bought into our competitors. He picked another pen from the cup and just held it in his hands as his mind went to work. The Mafia and those groups of uppity old men would be a lot harder to deal with if they had their own genius gunsmith and a lot of time, one that the current cold peace provided. But that was not the only issue they were facing. The hitman cutting off the loose ends. I want him found. If you can't get anything from him, remove him. I want this done as soon as possible before our last trails go cold. Fisk ordered a nodding Wesley who took the dismissal for what it was as he took his bags and put away his folder. One more thing, sir. James said as he straightened himself. Lady Vanessa said to remind you of your dinner plans at 9. Just like that, a good pool of anger and irritation that Fisk had been feeling was simply washed away as the reminder of the lovely woman that was waiting for him at the end of all this. I'll call her myself. He picked up his phone and picked up himself with shocking ease and walked towards the wall of windows that watched over the city below while his phone rang. All this. Everything he had done for himself. Every decision he had made. They were all, hello, Wilson. Dear Vanessa. Peter Parker swerved with the kind of swiftness he had never once used since got bit by that one radioactive spider. The mad cackle from the Green Goblin, so jealous that Jameson came up with the better name. He had been so close with Green Elf, sent a tingle that traveled up his spine to his eyes. He had been fighting the Green Goblin for the past 15 minutes and his body had been moving on its own for at least 2/3 of that. He was sweating under the suit and that wasn't because of the heat. Sweating under the suit was normal, especially on sunny days. But never once since becoming Spider-Man did he ever sweat from exertion. It was a late realization but the verdict remained the same. The Green Goblin was dangerous, Spider-Man had realized after the 5th minute of his body moving on auto-dodge. Thugs and bullies were dangerous. Criminals with knives and guns were dangerous. The Green Goblin was dangerous, but in an entirely different way. Spider-Man did not care about a crowd of criminals with knives. He could dodge bullets with flair and a joke mid-quip. he was trying with moderate success to dodge everything the Green Goblin was throwing his way. His muscles were tingling for the first time, and not in a good way. "Spider-Man, Spider-Man, where are you, Spider-Man?" Peter groaned as he flipped off the surface of a building and twisted midair as two things wheezed past his neck and thigh. He used his left hand to fire a web, only for his eyes to widen a second later as he tried to correct his mistake, only to be too slow as the Goblin's glider smacked him across the face and sent him falling to the ground. Sure, Mers. His manners kicked in even in his extremely panicked state. His left web shooter busted, crushed by the Goblin before he could get a good use out of it. His wrist spat a web string that hung against the bottom of the glider and used it to effectively escape its flight path. Blades crawled out from the glider's underside and cut off the web, but Peter was already on his second swing away and pirouetted off it to come at the Goblin from behind. It turned out to be a bad move as the Goblin turned around and fired off these little bladed discs that also exploded. If that was all, Peter would have seen it as manageable, but that was not the case because of how fast they traveled. The wrist contraption the Goblin had on and whatever sudden boost the glider seemed to have at every last second were so identical and analogous to how his own web shooters worked. It had been a week since their last fight, which was also the Goblin's first appearance, and the Goblin, whoever he was, had created his own devices that worked like his web shooters. They were collecting information on him. His spider senses rang again as he dodged another salvo of flash-speeding exploding discs which left numerous cuts on his body. He looked at the Goblin, lately realizing again that he wouldn't beat the Green Goblin's long-range advantage. He ran up the side of the building and jumped into the roof, his neck tingling even as he heard the whirring of the Goblin's glider giving chase. The moment the glider broke over the roof, Peter pressed a button on his shooter and fired a blob of web instead of a string. The Green Goblin seemed to realize what it was, but his glider was in a full tilt so he couldn't dodge as the web bomb exploded in his face and splashed webs everywhere. The concentration could use some work, Peter thought as he rushed the Green Goblin off his glider and off the roof and started pummeling him as they started free falling. The glider would be stuck for the next few seconds Peter did not waste as he started giving the Goblin a beating of his lifetime. The man had a mean swing, but Peter was reassured in the fact that he was the stronger one, but that did not mean that the Goblin was in any way weaker. Ha ha, yes, the Goblin cooed. Give me more. Peter's ears picked up on the glider flying towards them in a low hum, but he didn't stop his assault. Whoever was behind this mask was a madman, Peter decided. Peter never felt any form of hesitation or disbelief from the man when he began terrorizing people with bombs and riddles. He turned to the glider at the last moment when it wouldn't have enough room to dodge and fired a barrage of webs at it that sent it tumbling to the ground. The Green Goblin used the reprieve to elbow him across the head and kicked him away, but not before firing off his wrist stingers. Shit. Peter couldn't take it anymore and cursed. Today was going to be a very long one. Don't die now, little spider. Keep on dancing for me. As if everything so far had not been enough, the Goblin shot off a grappling hook from his wrists and righted himself before he started bouncing off the concrete. Man, what did Christmas ever do to you? Peter asked as he hung off a web upside down. He was supposed to be helping Aunt May with dinner in 20 minutes, and here he was dealing with the Mr. Jolly Terror. They were both studying the other, like kids checking out the other kid's bike to make sure that theirs was better, and Peter was certain that he was losing on that front. Okay, that's it, Gobby. Up those hands, he said as he mimed jabs. Time for round 2. Number 25, Chapter 25. The merchant enjoys the comfortable noise. Do you even go out to stretch your legs for a bit? Jessica asked as she walked around the shop to browse the multitude of items on display. I mean, you are always behind that stuffy counter every time I come here, she said as she closed a box of glowing red chess pieces. You look like you could stay there all day. I know. That's the vibe you give off every time I come around. Not really. Isaac's words drifted over to where she was without him needing to shout or strain his voice like she did. I can go out when I want, but I don't generally see any reason why. Definitely some weird magic mojo shit, she thought. You know, weird shit happens every day all over New York. You are almost guaranteed to see some truly weird shit, like aliens and superheroes throwing their powers around, at least once a week. You are telling me you haven't seen any of those stuffs with your own eyes? I hear about it well enough. She could hear his shrug along with his reply. And besides, you'll find that it quickly loses its appeal when you've seen it 1,000 times. Rigged. She took off a beautiful cloak from a posing mannequin and threw it over her shoulders. And where do you come from exactly? She heard him scoff, making her chuckle herself because she wasn't exactly being subtle. Somewhere far from here. It's not on any map you know, and it's not any place you've heard of. I won't say more than that. Fair. She shrugged and turned around to look at a mirror only to see her lack of reflection. She took off the cloak, put it on, took it off, put it on, and watched with interest as she disappeared and reappeared. She shrugged and put it back on the mannequin. So back to the former question, when was the last time you went out to get some fresh air? Quite a while back. Came the cryptic reply. It was vague as hell, but she did not needle it any further, only asking him surface questions as she browsed his wares. And besides, the air in here is fresher than the one outside. Now that he said that, she took in a deep breath and exhaled while nodding. Yeah, this was fresh air. Hey, Isaac, how long have you been a merchant? She came in front of glass that had a huge pair of human-sized black wings that looked like a craftsmanship of feathers, ropes around the bone, and probably plastic or wax. It looked like a genuine prop item if not for the bloodstains at the head of the wings. There was a little plaque in the box with the name of the prop wing. Icarus wings, god of war, should never have flown too high, my man. She looked at the blood splatter and confirmed that it was real blood. From the looks of it, you never even made it that high. Tough. And why do you want to know, Jessica? She shrugged. Just curious. Quite a while. He said tersely, which made her snicker. Isaac was a whole different vibe once you got him to drop the polite bit, and she was quickly realizing that he didn't care for much outside of his shop. Wait, how old are you even? Quite. All right, Grandpa, I'll tone it down. His response to that was a tired groan. Interesting. She thought. He never gave her a clear answer, but he also made sure to refute any false statement or misunderstanding even when it was clear that she was just teasing him. He didn't do that when she called him a grandpa. Isaac was weird, oh she knew that. She's known that for quite a long while now. All she was currently doing was trying to find how deep the weird hole went. Real shit though, she picked up a probably broken compass that kept spinning around. Is this like an NDA thing or something semi-official? Or you just can't be bothered? I'll say I'm pretty bothered right now. She heard his dry mutter around her ears and it satisfied her funny bone. Come on, humor me. He exhaled a long breath. It's a bit of everything. It's not as strict as you think, and it's not as loose as you'd expect it to be. This time it was her turn to groan as she admired a collection of beautiful signet rings that were apparently called daylight rings. Who would need rings for daylight? Oh, that makes sense. Mind telling me what's with the sudden interest? She heard him ask as she perused the weird collection of eye patches. Just simple curiosity. She replied easily. We're friends. It's kind of weird that I don't know anything about you, and I still don't, mind you. Right. She frowned in mock outrage at his dry and sarcastic reply to her response. Watch it, Buster. You don't trash declarations of friendship like that. She could hear the fleeting echoes of the silent fed-up whine he let out. She completely ignored the jar of preserved red patterned eyes, and quickly moved on from the uninteresting white gloves with some red drawings on their backs. So yeah, I'm just curious about you. She let out absent-mindedly as she admired a finely crafted red dress. And you're not making it any easier for me. Sorry to disappoint you, but your curiosities are not going away anytime soon. Just let it go. Isaac said plainly. And on the subject of letting things go, did you come all the way here to window shop? I don't mind either way, but I guess I'm just curious. She saw a pair of identical katana that were heavily chipped to the point that it looked like a pair of jagged teeth along the sword's edge. I'm using it to get away from my sister. She's been pestering me all week to go for a date she'd set up for me with this guy. She sighed as if trying to drown the effect of the memory. I finally agreed and I went last night, but ugh. Yikes, that bad? Isaac asked with a performative wince. She scratched her head as the memory of the previous night was successfully putting her in an awkward state. Not really. He was kinda nice, I guess. He was really happy about the date, but I just couldn't get into it. I'm not arrogant enough to not admit that I single-handedly ruined the date. I've got my own issues, and if anything, last night showed me that I'm not quite ready for the dating thing. I'm also not ready to explain to my sister about how I single-handedly ruined a date she had been so excited to help me set up, or rather set up for me. She stretched out her head to take a look at Isaac's confused, amused expression. See? That's how you answer a question. Wow. Just wow. Isaac said as his tape resumed playing. Crazy, huh? She cracked a self-satisfied smirk his way. Isaac, however, shook his head as he looked at her in a new light. I'm just surprised you were that self-aware. I'm trying to find it and I still can't see it. Ass. She flipped him off and retreated behind the row of shelves and continued her idle perusal. The silent lull did not last long, and surprisingly it was Isaac who broke it. Does your sister know? What? About your issues. Maybe try telling her you're not ready to date instead of just brushing her off. She huffed in a small laugh. What are you, some kind of shrink? Hell no. Isaac replied instantly. Even if I was, I would have charged you before telling you anything. She didn't touch the little flute thing that was somehow an ocarina of time and instead let her attention be taken by a lightsaber and a real hoverboard. She doesn't know, not fully. Maybe she suspects, maybe. I don't know. She paused in studying the lightsaber and asked in a joking tone. Why so suddenly interested? Do you have some magical pill in there that'll help me with my problems? She'd forgotten for an instant that Isaac was a merchant and had just thrown out a teasing comment. Isaac gave a simple reply. Most likely. But you'll still have to buy it. How nice. She shook her head ruefully. But I'm afraid I'll be declining it for now. The bell tinkled and an old woman came in with slow and steady steps. Isaac walked around his counter and approached her. Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you with anything? Ah, good boy. She said, pleased as she patted his shoulders. I was looking for old cookbooks and a friend said you might have one. How old? Anything from 91 down. She said and had on a hopeful smile when she saw Isaac nod and walk into the store. Here. Jessica called out and handed him a bunch of cookbooks that she grabbed from the aisle she just left. Thanks. He returned to the old woman whose smile bloomed into a happy stretch as she saw him coming with the books. This is from 91, this is from 85, this is from 77, and this is from 49, he slowly explained and showed her the books and watched her smile grow with every one. She instantly picked up the one from 1949 and went through the index for a few seconds before letting out a joyful hooray as she must have found the recipes she was looking for. How much, my dear? She asked with the intensity of every grandma when their grandchild's dinner was at stake. $32. Really? Yes. Isaac held a patient smile as she rustled through her bag and brought out her card to pay. He could have sworn that she had a happy skip on her legs as she left his shop with her legendary cookbook in tow. For a second there, I was afraid you were going to call out a ridiculous amount, she said as she came from behind to watch the woman leave. Isaac frowned at her words. Why would I do that? It's an old cookbook and I believe that it is my most perfect sale in a long time. If it were a magical cookbook then the price would have been completely different. How different are we talking? The cheapest mundane adjacent cookbook I have is $7,260. Isaac remarked and then added as an afterthought. It can go from anywhere between there and $22 million. I also have more expensive ones that contain food guides for sages, celestials, immortal venerables, and even primordials. She looked at him as if trying to use this last statement as a measurement for the kind of person he was, or what kind of being he was. In the end she just gave up. That was a rabbit hole that she was too hungry and occupied to dig in. She was completely sure that he was not a human, maybe human adjacent, but there was no way he was completely human. Another thing she couldn't wrap her head around was his business-focused mind, which let him not care about almost anything if it had nothing to do with his trade. She once jokingly asked him what would happen if a thief or a bad guy came in and bought some of his most dangerous weapons, and his instant response was how ecstatic he would be if someone really came to buy his more expensive stuff. He was fair in his trade and neutral to everything else. Everyone is solely responsible for what they buy from my store. That statement alone showed just how inexistent he cared about who his customers were. Not to mention the weirder things she would usually see on his shelves, like those jar of fresh eyes and a skull that was wordlessly crying blood. She really didn't know what to think about them, so she just did the most semi-effective thing that she could do about it. She simply asked Isaac. 90% of the goods in my storage were bought or acquired in some sort of trade. You'll be surprised at the number of things people will be willing to sell for a chance to achieve their dreams. Those red eyes, for example, belong to the deceased members of some ninja magical clan. The people who sold it to me were looking for strength and any sort of pseudo-immortality, so they used those eyes to barter for what they could get. Her face crinkled up in disgust. She was glad that she didn't touch them in any way. Magic eyes? Super magic ninja eyes. Isaac corrected as if doing so would make it more palatable. You're making me seriously reconsider touching anything from your shop. She eyed everything around her with newfound validated distrust. Her next words were cut off as her ringtone went off. She excused herself to a corner of the shop and answered her phone and had a short conversation with the caller, her sister, before returning to Isaac, who had taken his favorite spot behind the counter. It's time to bounce, she said. My sister just called. She's coming over to spend the night, again, and I have to get home before she does. She held her hand over the counter and Isaac shook it with a grip that always reaffirmed her suspicions. Catch you later, bud. She grinned as she turned to leave. Not anytime soon, I hope. Isaac groaned, but his smirk matched hers. Lies don't fit you, Isaac, she yelled as the door closed behind her, leaving the shop once more in its peaceful silence. Number 26, Chapter 26. The merchant's valued customer Peter carried his heavy backpack as he trudged into junk and stuff with a dejected mien. His recent scuffles with the Green Goblin were escalating so fast that it was steadily growing past anything he was comfortable with. The scaled hob seemed to always know how to push him to new limits with every encounter. And then there was the smearing campaign that Jameson was religiously spearheading, which had only grown more intense and scathing to the ears these past few weeks. He made it a routine to stress the fact every day that Spider-Man's presence was the reason for the rising crime rate in the boroughs, with his latest proof being Green Goblin's emergence. He was hardly getting any sleep nowadays, his sleep schedule having grown worse than that of the average hormonal teen. He was basically functioning on opportunistic naps for the better part of the week. Now he was functioning on 15 hours of sleep for the last 5 days, he was behind on 4 assignments, his attendance was tanking, he was sleeping through classes, he missed 3 dinners with Aunt May, oh he was going to hell for that one, and he had botched 2 date plans, all the while having to stop Jameson's endless tirade, which was practically a part of the city's atmosphere at this point because he could seem to escape it. From his neighbors blasting their radio in the morning, electronic billboards and TVs along the street, and even at school, from getting to him. Oh, and he had trashed both of his suits beyond any semblance of functionality, all credits to the Goblin. Seeing his suits destroyed beyond repair was another type of pain that he hadn't been ready for. The material, whatever it was the perfect combination of comfort, elasticity, durability, and sheer quality. Now it was just pieces of cloth with numerous thin cuts and burnt parts. Ironically, his busted web shooters were the least of his problems. Now he was back here again with a pair of irreparable suits, a fist-sized dud explosive pumpkin, and a helpless hope that Mr. Isaac could make anything out of it. Fresh cool air hit him as soon as he escaped the outside sun and stepped inside the store. He once thought it was a little strange where the fresh air came from since he had never seen any vents or air conditioners inside the shop, but he soon ignored it after failing numerous times in coming up with an explanation. "Good evening, Mr. Isaac." "Hey, Peter." Like always, he was dressed in a shirt and vest semi-formal combo with his sleeves folded around his arms. On his face, his hair framed the round glasses and the neatly shaved beard on his chin. "How was school today?" He couldn't stop the instinctive grimace that crossed his face quickly enough because the man clearly saw it if the amused smile on his face were anything to go by. "That bad, huh?" he heard Mr. Isaac ask. "I've been noticing this new trend for a while but kept quiet so as not to pry, but I gotta ask, is everything okay?" He winced. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to, it's not that." He hurriedly put that out there. The last thing he wanted was for another misunderstanding to fester. And besides, Mr. Isaac was a genuinely nice person who sometimes let him do his homework here at the corner table. "It's just that, somehow, it feels like there's no time for me to do anything. I'm falling behind in class, Aunt May is getting worried and it's making me more worried that she's worried," he couldn't help but sigh loudly, "and I'm barely getting enough sleep. It's all a mess." "And the thing taking up your time? Is it really that important?" "It is," Peter replied instantly. "It is super mega important." He picked at the frayed edges of his flimsy jacket. "But I don't want it to be at the cost of everything else." That kind, huh?" He was given a sympathetic nod. He really didn't need sympathy right now. Feeling this shitty was enough. "Reminds me of when I was starting out and I was trying to arrange my inventory in a way that will fit in all my goods." Peter blinked while Mr. Isaac looked wistful. Here he was having an early life crisis and it was being compared to flashback logistics. The thing he didn't do was immediately brush it aside. Uncle Ben had told him so. He remembered sometimes, good times, when Uncle Ben would compare his particular bad day with some spring break cleaning 2 decades ago. It was an adult thing apparently. "What do you mean by that?" he asked as pulled off his bag and set it on the counter. "I have 2 similar answers for you that are basically 2 sides of a coin." The 2 fingers he held up became one. "1, you either choose which one is more important and go for it at the expense of the others. It's called a priority." Peter frowned. Yeah, he was not doing that. Sabotaging his education and future career, after everything Aunt May had done for him, was out of the question. There was no compromise to be met on that end. "The other one?" he asked with a weak chuckle. Mr. Isaac smiled. "You do what I did to that particular inventory." Peter raised a questioning eye at the dramatic pause. "You smudge everything in until it fits, even if it isn't perfect," he said with amusement clear on his face. "You tuck in your chin and do it all with a strong face and accept every pain that comes with it because it is a result of your choice. It won't be perfect by a long shot, but you'll start figuring out an easier way to carry all of them along." Peter's mouth gaped in a silent "oh." He was expecting either good or bad advice, but what he wasn't expecting was a "just do it." "You want to know what it's called?" the man asked. "It's called being an adult." Shocking, right? Peter's reply to that was a breathless laugh that was supported by partial disbelief. It was not a reply that comforted him or solved his problems. There was no solace in it. "Just do it if you want to do it, it is your choice." "Yeah, I think I'll do that." Mr. Isaac looked pleased at that. "Good. It's one of, if not, the best answer to your problem. But do fix your sleep and assignments as soon as possible. If what you're doing keeps affecting the people around you, that's usually a sign that you are doing it wrong." "Yeah, I'll try to do just that." He took in a deep breath and exhaled before reaching for his bag to unzip it. His eyes were fixed on his bag as a question, unbidden, left his lips. "I thought you didn't involve yourself with your customers outside of a trade." He brought out his busted suit sans the mask since half of it was blown away. "I don't," he heard Mr. Isaac say. He brought out an older model of his current web shooter. "You're not just a customer, you're a valued customer. It's a bit more than that actually. You're more of a friendly neighbor than a simple customer. That and the shop likes you. Don't sweat the fine print, kid. He intentionally refused to raise his head because of how hot his face and ears were. He was not used to any sort of special attention, even if it was for something as simple as being seen as a friendly neighbor rather than a customer. That aside, what new junk have you brought for me? And with that his receding embarrassment came back in full bloom. The fact that he only traded in his broken gadgets made him feel a tiny bit scummy on the inside. It was only a tiny bit because Mr. Isaac repeatedly reassured that they had good resale value in some markets. This. He was suddenly feeling nervous as Mr. Isaac picked up the tattered piece of clothing that had once been his superhero suit with clear interest in his eyes. He hoped he wouldn't start asking those questions now. I found it halfway inside the garbage in an alley. He might have thrown it away because of how busted it is. His mouth automatically parroted his made-up excuse, lie, before he was even asked. All he received for it was an absent-minded grunt which he happily accepted. Do you have the masks? He hesitated for a second before reaching in and brought them out. For some reason, he always felt like the mask was what made everything real, like it was the final piece to the Spider-Man puzzle. There it is. Now this is an antique piece. He heard the merchant's whisper which made him feel a bit complicated inside. The two older model web shooters were laid on top of the two destroyed suits. To Peter, the image felt like it held some deeper meaning. I need every edge I can get if I want to put a quick stop to the goblin. From Mr. Isaac's words, I can expect some value from them. I need enough materials for maybe 4 suits, and a new batch of chemicals for my webs. I guess I'll be using the stronger formula. And also experiment some new variations, can't forget about that. Nice catch, Peter. I'll take these 2 off your hands. A pair of Spider-Man's original suits. Not just that, the very first 2 he made, yeah, you definitely gotta trade. The hope in Peter's heart surged. He could tell that Mr. Isaac was genuinely happy with these. It was somehow funny that he got the materials for the suit, web shooters and web fluids from the man, and here he was selling them back to him as destroyed scraps. That is not funny, Peter. It almost feels like we're scamming him. Okay, no more thinking. I apologize if I'm overstepping, but how can you even sell that? I feel like I'm scamming you. I'm sorry if I'm being insensitive. Mr. Isaac sighed. I feel like we keep having this conversation any time you sell me something. Sorry. It's alright, kid. It just shows that you're a good sort. He reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of water which he threw at Peter, who stuttered a thanks as he caught it. As for your question, let me ask you this. How much do you think Captain America's World War II uniform would sell for in an auction even if it was partially destroyed? Peter's random trivia brain spun a few circles and marked out highlighters like antique, collector's item, auction, celebrity, superhero, world's most famous, and came to a staggering pause. A lot. He muttered. If I were to give an estimate, between $10 to $20 million. If a bidding war starts, it might probably go as high as $50 million. Peter's mouth dropped, but the merchant wasn't finished. Spider-Man fits all those criteria, but on a lower scale. Say I store them away for the next 5 years and Spider-Man continues to become a more famous hero, their value will also increase. The man looked at the younger boy, more specifically the remaining sprout of doubt in his eyes, and decided to make an exception for reasons known only to him. He opened his drawers and brought out his invoice book. He flipped through the pages and stopped at one before he resumed speaking. Remember that busted scrap you sold me quite a while ago? He showed Peter the invoice but ensured to cover everything else except the price. That's how much I sold it for. Peter's mind blanked. $10,000. 10,000 freedom currencies. 10,000 democracy tokens. No, snap out of it. That is not how you were raised. The unbending morals that his aunt and late uncle raised him with stopped his mind from straying towards something filthy. You didn't have to, he said as he pushed the book back. I'm sorry for being pushy, Mr. Isaac. It's no problem like I said, kid. I just figure that it'll finally put your mind to rest for the next time you come to trade something. Now where were we? He returned the book and Peter suddenly gulped as they stared at each other with different forms of anticipation. For the 2 full sets of damaged suits and 2 web shooters, I'll give you $11,600. Deal? Bah, what? Peter exclaimed. He expected at most a few $100, and Mr. Isaac's happy mood made him greedily hope for like $1,000. Are you serious? The man nodded and began what Peter had quickly come to realize as business speech. While it would be easy to rip off and defraud our customers, especially the ignorant ones, we here at Junk and Stuff value transparency and fair trade. The price I gave you is what I value those items at this point in time in respect to their future potential. What could Peter say? This was the biggest sum he's ever had, and he couldn't help but think of the things he could do with it. The bills, the rent, some clothes. Aunt May's still with us? Why yeah. It's just, a lot. Peter had to actively try to slow down his rapidly beating heart. He was that shocked. He didn't even feel this way in all of his fights with the Green Goblin. Mr. Isaac pointed at the damaged suits, antiques now. Still haven't gotten confirmation. Trade? Why yes. Of course. I'll trade. Yes please. Mr. Isaac nodded in the business way he usually did and folded the suits and kept them away. Before I send over your balance, are you buying anything? Peter nodded, putting a pleased smile on Mr. Isaac's face. Fantastic. Write me the list for the specifics while I bring out a catalog for things you might be interested in. Number 27, Chapter 27. The merchant gives a gift. One of the greatest tragedies of being a merchant, other than the lack of customers, which is easily a death sentence, which is also the thing they have to deal with the most, was boredom. Many merchants shaved away this depressing time by taking up different hobbies from places they travel to, or they start learning other skills, and sometimes even selling it as part of their hobbies. They didn't really care what it was or the specifics of what it is, as long as it sustained their interest enough and dulled the ache of time slowly passing by. It could range from something so far left like being a multi-dimensional tattoo artist to something relative like being a blacksmith or a herbalist. There was the overarching problem that there would eventually grow to the limit of that hobby, but that was easily bypassed by picking another skill and doing the same, and continuing doing the same until you eventually get bored of it all and start considering the more obscure options. All in all, time as a merchant gave the benefits of mastering many skills or engaging with a multitude of hobbies and even using them as side hustles. Some merchants, like Isaac, would choose one of their main hobbies as something that they could never truly master, like reading. Being someone who never really got well with the entire concept of boredom, Isaac always made it a point to get an extensive collection of books from every world and reality he ever finds himself in, both for his personal consumption and to trade. He hardly made any distinctions, as it could range from anything like basic academics to advanced fields of study. Storybooks, folklore, magazines, deep fiction, fanfictions, sport and beauty issues, medicinal research, magic, government conspiracy, forbidden knowledge, arcane guidelines and esoteric techniques. He bought everything. If any of the books stole his interest long enough, he would dedicate some of his time to practicing it until he lost interest or mastered it and moved on. It was also a good thing that most of the time, practicing these things did not require him to leave his shop. Imagine the number of potential customers he would lose every time he closed up shop and left because he wanted to learn more about something. Other than that, most times he just read things to pass the time. Like currently. He took a sip from a glass of wine that looked like it was exploding into iridescent sparks and also changing its state from liquid to something ephemeral. The book he was reading, the really dark book by the scholars of GOLB, was one of the few books he could get from that exclusive sort before they just up and moved out to who knows where. The content was gripping, for lack of a better word, but it made for a really interesting read. He didn't really have a preference for the things he read, but he wouldn't deny that the horror genre and thriller effect of books like these really stole his interest. He could do without the screaming souls part, that and the open invite to the privatized hellish dimension hidden within the crevice of the words, but they did set the tone for what kind of book it would be, so he couldn't really complain. And besides, what kind of premium horror book lacks screaming souls or tries to curse you with every sentence? Oh, these guys were kinky, he said with a low whistle. It was really a shame that they had to leave so soon. They had impeccable manners and they were all great writers and poets. A thick plume of smoke exploded out as he flipped the page, causing him to sigh deeply as he looked behind him. Guys, no peeking. You know how he feels about sharing his things. The small army of books floating behind him thrummed sadly and indignantly like it was a perceived offense. He sighed again as some of the books disappeared with visual effects while the others sulked as they floated back to their stations. The cover of the book he was holding turned blood red and spouted 7 infernal tongues that started chanting karmic curses in 14 lost languages. Okay, there's no need for you to be doing all that. He gave the book a hard shake that dispelled whatever it was doing. And besides, those guys are your juniors. They are just trying to learn something from you since you and the other old guys don't like to teach them. The screaming of the souls intensified, but the smoke obscuring it did disappear. This was the pride of sentient books. Most of them disdained the idea of teaching those they considered weak and unworthy, whether or not they were books. Hey, bring back those words. I haven't finished reading them yet. He looked up just as the bell rang softly and sighed as he saw the 2 teens that just entered his shop. Bookmark that page, and the words too, he said to the book that had already coded itself in an illusion as he put it down. Oh, this place looks nice, the peppy voice of an exuberant teenage girl cried out. It looks like a literal junk store, replied the droll voice of an extremely bored and fed-up girl. He didn't have to wait too long as 2 parallel expressive girls came into view. One looked outgoing and generally friendly with bright colors and everything, while the other one looked expressively introverted, dark-fitted and withdrawn. Ellie, don't be mean. The sparkled hair one whined while her friend just shrugged. I'm just saying it how I see it. Her friend pouted. Then try to see it better. This time her response came in 2 fonts. The first was a dry deadpan that effectively dispelled the pout, the second were words that continued in the same pace. If it tried to look better I wouldn't need to. Yukio sighed dramatically, her face set in an amused smile, as she shoulder-checked Ellie playfully. They looked at Isaac, who was watching the short exchange with a smile which made Ellie automatically frown while Yukio gave him a tittering wave as she glided over. Hi. Hi, Isaac replied as he replicated Yukio's easy smile which made Ellie groan as she came up behind her. I like your store. Her smile and words were so genuine that it made Isaac's smile widened. Thank you, he said truthfully. His humble shop was his pride and joy. Having someone compliment it so genuinely was one of the best feelings ever. So, anything I can help you girls with today? Anything at all? Yeah, Yukio, why did you drag me into whatever the shop is supposed to be? Ellie asked sarcastically. No offense, dude. Isaac shrugged. They both looked at Yukio, who looked exasperated at Ellie's reply before we reverted back to Isaac. Oh, we are just going to look around. Is that okay? Of course, nope. Not this time, babe. Ellie immediately interjected. The last thing I need is Teach coming to pick us up. I don't need my ear talked off just because you decided to window shop at every store you see. But Ellie, Yukio whined. It was an effective whine as Ellie flinched, but it was not potent enough to make her acquiesce. No buts, Ellie said with a determined look. It's either you buy something you already have in mind, or we leave. Fine. The pout was strong, but Ellie just rolled her eyes. She tapped her lips cutely and held a comically thinking pose, which seemed to work as her eyes widened happily while she smiled smugly in Ellie's direction. She turned to Isaac, who was patiently waiting for whatever her order would be. A friend's birthday is coming up soon and I want to get him something. Ellie frowned skeptically. Who? That seemed to be the wrong question given how deep Yukio's gasp was. Ellie winced under the disbelieving look of her girlfriend. Ellie. Cue another wince. It is Kurt's birthday in 3 days, how could you forget? Ellie could only manage an awkward shrug. I'm sorry, but I can't remember everyone's birthdays. Yukio could only shake her head at that, but she let it go for now as she turned back to Isaac. A present for our friend. And what kind of things does your friend like? Games, limited edition cards, toys, literally all the things that teenage boys in their 20s like. Ellie helpfully offered. That's true, but I can't really pick which one. Yukio remarked and held up her fingers and started crossing them out as she listed off her points. They already have their games. Limited edition cards are super expensive. I don't think he likes toys all that much, at least not as much as Evan. Ellie shrugged while Yukio deflated. Luckily for them, Isaac was a merchant who was well versed in identifying people's tiny needs. Let's take a step back, he said, drawing the attention of both girls. What kind of person is Kurt? Oh, he's very nice, and very kind too. He shares a lot, and he also taught me how to bake once. Ellie pinched Yukio's arm before she could rap off a list of every good quality the guy had. That's nice and all, but that won't be helpful. She sighed tiredly, more of a groan, as if she was about to exert so much unnecessary effort. He's the kind of guy who'll cherish anything you give him, which kinda makes it hard to get him something meaningful. Likes the color blue and red if that helps. Nothing demonic or hard punk, he's too religiously Christian for that. Something small too. It doesn't have to be functional, maybe just something he can hold or look at or whatever. And maybe not too expensive, he's jittery about the price of things. What? She looked from Isaac, who had some kind of smile on his face, to Yukio, who was mouth wide as if she just won some golden point or something. On. Ellie, that's so sweet. Yukio cooed and hugged the slightly embarrassed jaded teen. It's nothing. Let me see if I can find something. It was hardly helpful information, but for Isaac that was more than enough. The shop was more than just a housing structure with some nifty tricks. He walked slowly between the aisles, through rows of shelves, looking for which of these items would make a good present. The two girls, Ellie and Yukio, genuinely wanted to get something for their friend, Kurt, and that meant that the shop was more than eager to respond to that want. He stopped along one of the rows and took 2 steps backwards. He reached for one of the shelves, behind a conspicuously large jar of dirt, and took out what was behind it. It felt warm to the touch. He smiled. So it's finally your time, huh? He returned to the girls who had busied themselves with checking out the stuff around his counter. Got something? I think so. The smile on his face was a soft one, something the girls noticed, as he placed it on the counter for them to see what it was. Athelstan's rosary, Vikings, a prized possession of a man of the faith. A man who, despite his failings and situations, strived to uphold the word even until his death. Kindness, love and forgiveness were things Athelstan strived to live by, even when among his enemies. The impact of his life, short as it was, can only be understood by those who saw it. Ellie, who had been about to comment that it was just a rosary and that Kurt had one, kept quiet when she saw the look on Isaac's face. This belonged to one of the kindest men I've met. He was not special by any means, but the way he lived was beautiful to watch. He looked at the two girls, who looked unsure of how to react. I tried over 100 times to buy this from him, you know. I offered him gold, diamonds, lands, even his freedom, and never once did he even consider it. How did you get it then? Ellie asked suspiciously. Isaac's smile remained, only now it contained a jaded irony. He gave it to me for free, moments before he died. He loved the confused and aghast looks on their faces. A man of faith on enemy land, once a slave to his great friend, the same man who invaded his home and massacred his people, willingly walked to his death in peace despite knowing he could escape it. Yukio frantically shook her head, her expression one of profound sadness. We can't possibly pay for that. It's too important. Isaac waves off her concern. It's okay. You can have it for free. It was the only reason why he gave it to me. It was for me to pass his gift to someone who will need it. We can't possibly accept it for free. Yukio shook her head vehemently. And besides, Ellie started, her earlier suspicion faded but curiosity now remained. Why would you give such a thing to a pair of teenagers to give to their friend who you've never met? What makes you even certain that he'll even appreciate such a thing? You've never met the dude. Then let me ask you this, will your friend treasure this? Their silence was all the answer he needed. And besides, it's what it wants. Ellie raised a brow at him at the last statement while Yukio was just overwhelmed with emotions and was covering her mouth with her hands. Isaac brought out an unadorned rectangular box and placed the silver cross inside it and pushed it towards them. I'm sure your friend will like it. Yukio finally got back her voice, but her words were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell ringing. Yukio, Ellie, are you girls in here? A woman's voice called out softly, causing Ellie to wince while Yukio's smile grew. We're in here, Ms. Aurora. Now we're fried. Aurora Monroe walked in, a white-haired dark-skinned woman with clear blue eyes, and looked calmly at the two girls. Hello, she gave Isaac a perfunctory greeting, we should get going. The others are waiting for you. Sorry for the wait, Ms. Rowe. We were getting a present for Kurt, she said, holding up the box to Aurora, who finally smiled softly. That's thoughtful, but we still have to leave if you're done with your purchase. Both girls looked at Isaac, who gave them an assured nod. It's all right. I'm certain he will like that very much. Okay, if you say so. Yukio said while Ellie shrugged nonchalantly. Thanks for the gift, Mr. Isaac. Thanks for the gift, Mr. Isaac. They turned around to leave and walked past Aurora, who gave a small apologetic nod. I'm sorry if they were too troublesome. We weren't. Isaac waves it off. No such thing. They were nice kids. Nothing else was said after that as all his customers left. He sat back on his chair and picked up his book to continue reading as the illusion over the book and his drink disappeared. Now where was I? I think it mentioned something about GOLB sublimating a universe or something. Yes, this is where I stopped. Number 28, Chapter 28, Spies in a Shop. It was always a surprising and equally dangerous thing whenever something new crept up in mutant circles. The worst would be if no one knew what it was. Mutants as a whole was already a shifty topic regardless of what stance you took towards them, and they were somewhat of a secluded community given that they tended to deal with their own issues themselves without allowing it to escalate publicly, so it was already a problem and a half to get direct news on what was happening between them. Their secrecy and introverted nature were not the only things that made them a thorny topic, instead it was the specific cast of characters that holstered up the banner of mutant kind on their shoulders. The most infamous was without doubt Magneto, the master of magnetism, a mutant of the highest tier who led his Brotherhood of Mutants, a rather extroverted group of local, international, and global terrorists with a frankly worrisome power base. There were other coalition of mutants across the globe, but none of these groups worried the Council of World Leaders more than Magneto's Brotherhood for the simple fact that they had the means to render the strongest military forces in the world useless. It came as no surprise that getting concise information of what was happening within these groups of people was a task and a half. It also came with the job hazard of them quickly figuring out who and who was snooping around for information. Now, all these were bad, but what was truly worse was finding out that no one knew anything about something huge that had happened or was happening in the mutant community. That was the first indicator that things were about to go to shit on an epic scale. Honestly, ventures like these were ones where it was wise for outside parties, governments, military forces, ghost organizations, black site ops, to watch from the sidelines and only swoop down when the carrion was putrid enough. At least that was what Clinton Francis Clint Barton thought. Unfortunately for him, he was a handful of promotions away from managerial, which he had absolutely zero interest in, so his opinions remained in his head whenever his boss made decisions. Again, to his misfortune, he was too good at his job that he became his boss' favorite problem solver, and hence why he was saddled with this unfortunate task of finding out what was going on within the mutant sphere. How would he even begin to tackle it? What kind of circular problem is this? He constantly asked himself, given the lack of starting points to the mission. This was his punishment for being too competent. His boss just assumes that he'll solve any problem he was given even if there was practically zero intel. All this, impossible missions and suicidal tasks, and there was not a single column of scheduled vacation or weekend breaks in his itinerary. The pay was good, way better than the average civil servant, but he practically never has a chance to spend it. Thankfully, someone else was doing the spending for him. His pessimistic musings were cut short as his burner rang. "Yeah? Just got back. Coulson said Fury put you on scavenging for some mutant slip. How's it going?" He groaned, making Natasha laugh from her end. "That bad, huh? It's not the worst I've been on, but it's still too early to judge," he said as he took a bite from his cracker and savored the sour taste. "It's like that time in Quebec. Boring and pointless is what it is. For now at least. At least your boring comes with a view and fresh air." The way she said it made him wince. Yeah, those types he hated the most. "Bhutan? Myanmar," she replied in a surly drawl. "I'm unassigned for now. How about it? Need a hand?" He smacked his lips together as the line went silent for a few seconds and looked at the 6 cracker wrappers on the ground. "Bring enough crackers," he said. "Sour cream and onion." She chuckled, and he could picture her shaking her head in disbelief. "That all?" Clint shrugged. "It's boredom, Nat. Maybe bring a few jokes and a board game. I'll see what I can do." The call ended there, drawing Clint back to the familiar silence and his pessimistic thoughts. And his leftover crackers. Now where was he? Yeah, trying to spot an invisible trail that would lead him to the newest mutant conspiracy. Given the whispers of said conspiracy, Clint understood just how important it was, regardless of how true it might be. Fury's call was right, Clint agreed, because the 2 times a mutant cure was spoken out loud, America almost lost every member of its executive branch, including the president. Magneto had threatened to uproot Washington when the truth of said cure was exposed. He understood that this was a priority red mission, and he agreed with its importance, but why did he have to be the one to do it? Coulson could have sent his squad of infill agents to do this instead of him, yeah right. They would have been found out on day 2. About damn time. He raised his head as he spotted his target walking out a decrepit warehouse. He mentally mapped out every possible route they would take and nodded to himself as a semblance simulation played out in his mind. 2 days. 2 days of shadowing a possible dead end, and he was just now getting a routine break. As for how he managed to string out some targets so soon? He traded a few favors, 3 to be exact, all to get a random direction where he proceeded to gamble his luck on it and hoped for a solid lead. From the few targets he had gathered, this was the first movement that didn't fit into the routine he'd mapped out for them. "Better hurry up, Nat." He chuckled to himself. He made himself comfortable as he started tracking his mark. The nature of the mission meant that he couldn't dismiss the smallest clues. Depending on how it went, if it got worse than this, the mission could stretch out for weeks, or if he was truly unfortunate, months. 8 hours. That was how long he spent watching 3 mutants as they lazed around the burrows. Something poked at his back which made him sigh under his breath. "Are you getting rusty?" He snorted at Natasha's words and pointed at the ground where she was standing. She was standing on a very thin wire that had its other end trapped under his boot. She removed her hand from his back and stepped back with a smirk. "What does that do?" she asked as she stared at the inconspicuous wire she had stepped on. Knowing Clint, it could be an electric buzz or a mini-bomb. Clint turned to face her with a shit-eating grin on his face. "How would I know? It's a normal wire as far as I can tell." He kicked the wire to show that it was just a normal cut wire he had found lying around. Natasha rolled her eyes and hit him on the shoulder, quietly accepting that she lost this one. "So," she gestured with her head towards the window Clint was watching, "how is it going?" Clint scooted to the side to allow her an unobstructed view. "Nothing really suspicious so far. I would have written them off if not for one little suspicious thing. There was this pawnshop they entered." "How suspicious are we talking about?" There was a small smirk on Clint's face. "For some reason I couldn't listen to any conversation that happened inside the shop. Natasha frowned slightly, not quite understanding what he was getting at. Clint tapped on the hearing aid lobbed around his ears. How many pawnshops do you know that can block out the R&D boys' special hearing aid? I see. Clint shrugged at the 3 mutants in the street across. It could be something else, but it's still worth checking out. The only thing left is to question them and move on. Then what are you waiting for? His best friend asked with folded arms as she leaned against the window. Clint regarded her with a raised brow. For you, obviously. His watch beeped twice at that moment. And the time is up. Come on, let's go. She said nothing and followed after him. Their first stop was the trio of mutants from across the street who Clint easily put to sleep with darts, and they both discreetly relocated them back to the building across the street. Clint has strict orders not to involve himself with any altercations between whatever mutant groups he came across, and this was already towing that line somewhat. A dark setting, a little deliriousness, a threatening posture, that was all that was needed to get most information out of people. It worked on the 3 young men, but Clint and Natasha were quick to notice the rather obvious disparity. No matter what, they never answered any question that concerned other mutants, and they even denied knowing anything relating to a mutant cure. Both spymasters clearly saw the lie, and the only thing they let slip was the pawnshop they went to. Oh, Isaac sells all types of stuff. Anything you want, Isaac got it, was what they said when Clint asked about the pawnshop they visited. Selling out a capable handyman so quickly? Now why would you do that? Natasha had asked after their easy admission. The 3 of them had looked at each other and shrugged casually. He always tells us to refer people to his shop. They let the mutants go, not having a reason to detain them, and turned themselves towards the pawnshop. Clint was already writing off this entire endeavor as a waste of time, while Natasha remained highly amused at his misfortune. Is that a pun? Natasha pointed at the name hanging over the door of the shop. She was slowly developing a silent distaste of puns and other similar forms of humor because of a certain billionaire. I think it's funny, Clint said with an amused snort. They were both dressed in everyday civilian attire, with an array of small weapons discreetly hidden under their flaps and sleeves. What kind of pawnshop is this? Natasha asked as soon as they entered the shop and instantly spotted a huge fire-breathing dinosaur head hung on a wall. Interesting. Clint hummed with a semi-serious look on his face. Natasha looked at him and he redirected her gaze with a tilt of his head. Those are real katanas. Same with the glowing axe. They both shared a look, having known each other well enough to not need words to convey simple thoughts, and immediately marked this place down as a point of interest. To spies and assassins like them, caution wasn't a state they put themselves in but was instead the very air they breathed. They turned at the corner and once again heightened their caution. The shop owner, Isaac, stood behind his counter with a welcoming smile, but it was the way he was dressed that pressed their buttons. No one, absolutely no one, would dress up in crisp semi-formal wear to man a pawnshop in some no-name neighborhood smack dab between Queens and Brooklyn. Lovely day, isn't it? The man started with a friendly conversation starter. Is there anything I can help you guys with? Now what would be the best way to go about this? To slowly prod or be blunt were the only 2 available options. Clint leaned against the counter, putting himself in Isaac's range to watch him for any suspicious movement, while Natasha mirrored him and leaned on the other end of the counter. Blunt was the best option to put him on the back foot. I've got a question for you. It would be in your best interest if you answered truthfully, Clint said, staring straight at Isaac's eyes while the latter remained calm and smiling. Sure. Isaac accepted with a nonchalant half-shrug. If I have the answers then I don't mind answering. Ask away. Natasha and Clint watched his expressions and every micro-twitch of his body as Clint opened his mouth to speak. Word is that there is some sort of mutant cure being passed around without anyone knowing anything. What do you know about it? Their laser focus was pinpointed at Isaac as he opened his mouth to speak. I've got no idea about no mutant cure. I don't really keep up with that sort of news. The reply came easy and genuine, but neither of them were sold. And besides, Isaac hadn't finished speaking. But if you're looking for something that can destabilize or neutralize the X gene, then I believe I have a few things that you might be interested in. Number 29, Chapter 29, Spies, Flies. As sounds the same credit to the both of them, they smoothly covered up their brief lapse and looked even more interested as they leaned forward against the counter and watched his every move with sharp, hawk eye. And we're just supposed to take your word for it? Clint asked, pulling the perfect act of a doubting client. I'm not talking about the copycat ripoffs flooding the market. I'm talking about the clean stuff, biologically compatible, no side effects. They slightly tensed up and their fingers inched towards their hidden weapons when Isaac adjusted his glasses as they watched for any follow-up movements which never came. No worries. You came to the right place. Isaac reassured them with a confident smile. Clint scoffed, while Natasha used the brief window where Isaac turned to him to fully survey the shop and the haphazard assortment of items displayed in every corner. I hope so. Someone referred you to us in confidence, and I would hate to be disappointed after all I've heard of you. Clint said with potent frown lines marring his face. It was frankly impossible how instantly they had jumped from a shaky desperate lead to a jackpot in seconds, but Clint and Natasha were nothing if not experienced and committed to the bit. There was still a good chance that this was all a hoax, and whether or not it was, Isaac, if that was his real name, was already a name on a list, that much Clint was certain of. Isaac chuckled. Well, I can't have that now, can I? It will be bad for business if I fail to meet up to expectations. They watched Isaac, from both ends of the counter, open a drawer and bring out a book that he started reading through, a book that sweetly made itself a priority item on Clint and Natasha's list. Not as robust a list to make its own catalog. Unfortunately, I can't really do anything about that. They heard him mutter to himself as he flipped through the pages of the book. He closed the book and looked at them, slightly apologetic. Normally I would have you look through the catalog to compare the options yourselves, but it's quite a rare commodity that I don't have enough options to make up a standard catalog. And how big is your standard catalog? Natasha interjected into the conversation with an amused and interested leer to her voice. A minimum of 100 options for the standard catalog, was Isaac's noncommittal reply. I tone it down to 50 for the special items if they belong to the same series. Once again, experience kept their reactions to nothing more than an interested eye raised to sell the bit. But don't worry, Isaac started, entirely oblivious to the two spies that had already decided to take him in and had signaled for an immediate extraction. I can print out a list of items in the range of your budget. Here Clint frowned and retorted in rising anger at the perceived slight. Get us the damn list and we'll decide if it fits into our budget. That also works. Isaac nodded with a shrug, professionally ignoring the fragile anger of his customer. One more thing, the magical or tech variety, which one do you prefer? Once again their fingers twitched. Tech magic is a little iffy for our tastes, Natasha replied, both of them doing a good job of masking the new heights their hackles had raised to. The insinuation was a damning and dangerous one that despite its lack of proof, supplied them with danger in a fog. They exchanged another glance that Isaac missed, too busy typing out their list on the weird monitor in front of him, and they saw the silent question and worry in the other's eyes. They had sent out concealed signals from their watches and burners, 2 quick beeps that signified immediate extraction and possible resistance, but they never received the affirmative beeps that signified that their request had been received and approved. Their first thought was that a signal jammer was in place, which supported the fact why Clint couldn't listen in on what happened inside the building. What was strange, however, was that they, especially Clint, could tell when active signal jammers were in place around them, and yet they couldn't with this one. Either it was a more sophisticated tech than what they were used to, or it was something out of the left field. They both hoped it was just a matter of sophistication. But even with all this, they didn't panic. They were the elites of their respective fields. They did not panic at every unexpected development. Clint, once more, spied a look around the shop, paying special attention to the weird assortments of medieval weaponry and strange modern ones that he suspected were props or cosplay mods, all the while Isaac's insinuation of magic drifted in his head. Yeah, no way. Not even a fool would hang out magic weapons and lightsabers in a pawnshop. Sorry for the wait. It was hardly a minute, but Clint made sure to keep the disgruntled frown on his face. Have at it. Natasha moved closer and took the fresh list from Isaac's hands with a smile, her fingers lightly brushing against his. DCM, DNA cancel metal, bullet, DNA superscript 2. This bullet delivers a chemical compound that suppresses specific genetic sequences, effectively neutralizing the problematic gene without physically removing it from the body. Asterisk can be manually tweaked to target specific genetic sequences. A raised brow and a heavy breath disguised as an appreciative hum. DNA resequencer, Stargate SG-1, an ancient device that can alter DNA in any way the operator understands, including removing genetic diseases, adding superhuman abilities, or even programming a person to disintegrate at a set time. You might want to allow someone who understands biology deeper than the mitochondria to operate this elderly device. Their hands trembled, just a teensy bit, as they read the second entry. They both thought of the same thing, super soldier serum. If this kind of tech was real, as long as they had the serum, applying it to special agents became infinitely less terminal. Like in the case of one Dr. Bruce Banner, they both looked at Isaac, questions warring in their heads, but they exercised patience and played out the deception. This is all you've got? Clint asked, tapping on the paper in Natasha's hands. The ones that can suppress or remove the X gene, those are the optimal picks. Clint nodded. Their retreat was still compromised, but that wasn't as important as getting as much information as they could. Information that this man in front of them was happily, stupidly, giving away. Genetic bomb, Killjoy's a handheld weapon that can be keyed to a specific DNA pattern and disintegrates only those matching the genetic target. It releases a pulse that destroys all cells containing the targeted DNA sequence, leaving others unharmed. Laboratory-tailored lymphocytes, blood mutant biologically engineered lymphocytes that reprogram DNA as a computational system. These microscopic medical machines restructure their host on a cellular level, effectively removing and replacing the original genetic programming. The Bohr Maker, a nanotech device that rewrites genetic code at the cellular level, granting enhanced abilities. A soup of nanomachines that systematically replaces the host's original DNA with new sequences. Quark-destroying drug, My Hero Academia, a substance capable of damaging the genetic mechanisms that compose someone's quark, permanently erasing their superhuman abilities. Created by Kaichisaki, Overhaul, using biological material from a child named Eri, whose quark rewind could revert living things to a previous state. Once it enters the bloodstream, it destroys the quark almost instantly by targeting the quark factor, the biological mechanisms behind quark functioning and other preternatural abilities, and returning it to that of a baseline human pre-evolution. Asterisk under special circumstances, the rewind frame can be pushed even farther. Clint swallowed as he rubbed the back of his neck with his hands and glanced at Natasha, who had lost the teasing smile on her face. He was 70% sure that this guy was full of shit, but it was the remaining percentage, the window of possibility, that made him stay his hand instead of dragging the dude over the counter for some deep interrogation. And also because of his line of work, the same work that tends to throw impossible, loose word, that one, curveballs at his face every other Wednesday. If a single thing on this list even slightly resembles the words it describes, he couldn't begin to imagine the clusterfuck of chaos it would cause. There was also the tiny bit that he ignored on the list, the outrageous price tag, which was a non-issue as far as he was concerned because he was sure as fuck that his one-eyed boss wouldn't be paying a single dime for any of it. The only transactional word that man knew was confiscation, which was as American as any word could get. How about it? Isaac's speaking knocked out his mental funk and reminded him that the man he was about to dox any second from now was speaking. Seen anyone that fits your needs? A couple, actually. Clint replied with a real interested grin. These prices, on the other hand. Isaac nodded in perfect understanding. The prices might look overwhelming, but I believe the quality speaks for itself. Each of them are genuine articles, and I can say this with full confidence, you won't find another one of these in any part of the globe. Except from junk and stuff. Natasha added. Except from junk and stuff. Isaac remarked. Mind if I snap a picture? Clint asked, and quickly clarified on seeing the look of confusion on Isaac's face. Need to show the boss. He'll decide which one we'll be getting, but I'll be the one handling the payment. The confusion washed away from Isaac's face and was replaced with a supportive smile. Of course, of course. Go ahead. The guy was almost too easy to fool, Clint thought to himself, but said nothing as Natasha took a picture and casually walked outside. Clint watched as she left, half expecting some trap to spring up when she got to the door, but surprisingly nothing of the sort happened. While your partner does that, is there anything that might interest your personal tastes? Isaac asked as he caught Clint staring at some of the interestingly displayed items around the shop. No need. I'm more unconventional when it comes to my hobbies. Clint said offhandedly as he counted down the seconds from Natasha's exit. Natasha did not take long before sauntering back into the shop and gave a small nod to Clint. What's the verdict? Isaac asked with the pleased smile of a man that was about to make bank. Too bad, pal, Clint chuckled. The verdict, you say? Well, that would be us taking you in. Huh, the moment Isaac turned to face Clint, Natasha's widow's bite lit up around her wrists and stung at Isaac with just enough punch to knock a grown man out. Ah, not this again. Isaac sighed with profound disappointment and ran his finger down his face. Natasha fired off 2 more shots, but they turned to smoke like her first shot as soon as they crossed the counter. Clint, with one hand on the counter, vaulted over to deliver a sharp kick to the man's head, only for his finely honed balance to spin. In a literal blink of an eye, that was how fast Natasha's confidence had sunk to hell from its all-time high. Clint. She started backpedaling while firing from both her stingers and her gun, her panic rising as she saw her bullets turning into smoke mid-travel. She bit her lips as she watched the man stand calmly behind his desk with a purple marble in his hands, the marble Clint had turned into when he attempted to kick the man. Her guns and stingers ran out of ammo, and it took her another split second to realize something damning. She had been backpedaling this whole time from the shop's interior map in her head, and according to the map it should have been impossible to be staring at Isaac because of the 2 corners to get to the door. She turned around and her sprint came to a dead stop. She was in a stark white room. A room that she couldn't see the end of. There was no exit or shelves in sight. She looked behind her and saw that the man was still standing behind his desk, playing with the marble in his hand, looking utterly bored as he stared at her. Are you done? He asked. Her eyes widened. No, why, silence. Now what am I going to do with you? Isaac muttered to himself with casual disinterest as he lounged on his chair behind the counter of his shop. Number 30, Chapter 30. How about we start again? Nick Fury, a ghost in a crowded world. A dumb man in a world where fools were the loudest and common sense was subjective. He was the shadow broker. The captain of the Flying Dutchman. The scarred pirate with the eye patch. He was not the name in the redacted files. He compiled the redacted files. Conspiracy theories? Those were his headlines after his morning coffee, black, like the coat he wears. No, Nicholas Joseph Nick Fury was the man who put names to shades and shadows. To him, threat levels and persons of interest were just a matter of clearance. Freedom and democracy be damned. He did not have the biggest gun, too bulky. Too glaring, because he did not need to. He knew who had the biggest guns and where they were aiming it at. The dome of operation that was S.H.I.E.L.D. was the best at what they did, and what they did best was knowing things and people. They were not the strongest organization out there, but S.H.I.E.L.D. had agents that knew people in stronger organizations. In case it wasn't clear, it wasn't America, Chinese or Russia that were spying on people, it was him, Nick Fury. It wasn't a bird, a plane, or a satellite in the sky. It was Nick Fury's one good eye. He was Big Fucking Brother. Now being the top guy in the know in their mud ball of a planet, Nick Fury, with S.H.I.E.L.D. as an extension, prided himself in having an ear, or eye, on every major and technically minor news that was worth hearing. Hearing about some gunsmith making good guns that were currently temporary ghost marks to enforcement databases, and distributing them to the crime gangs of New York was an interesting piece, but not one that required his intervention. He would bet his boots that the identity of the gunsmith won't remain a secret for much longer because of how stupid thieves and robbers could be, especially if they were gathered in a group or a family. If the guy was good enough, then he wouldn't mind interfering with the local gangs and scoop him up and use him as a favor to Ross. If the gunsmith was that good. Either way, he didn't really care much about it. He could list over 20 genius gunsmiths in Russia that were involved with the mob. Some gunsmith in New York was hardly something he cared about. That was the police's job. On the other hand, hearing rumors, bare whispers, about some vague mutant cure going around, and hearing that, allegedly, some mutants were giving up their mutation for compensation, now that was some interesting, and potentially dangerous news. He did not need a repeat of what happened in 05. Another scenario where Mr. Terrorist himself is threatening to flip over the Evergreen State. Admittedly, that wasn't even his biggest concern. He was more interested in which councilman or senator was involved in this, because this was just the type of thing they were fond of doing. As much as he couldn't trust Ross, he was firmly certain, 30%, that the old war hawk had nothing to do with this. Also, given the fact that some people somehow knew that there was some sort of mutant cure going around, it was annoying as fuck that no one knew anything about the mutant cure. It was as if the information came out from thin air and everyone sniffed it. The matter was a very delicate one that he was careful about who he sent to trace out a link. Sending either Coulson or Hill was synonymous with sending in a camouflaged nuke. They were the best he had, but he knew for sure that sending either of them would result in some kind of escalation. This needed stealth, experience, capability and precision. There was only one person he had, without outsourcing, that fit the bill to a T. Clint Barton. The Hawkeye. If it was espionage and infiltration, then he would have called back Natasha Romanoff and sent her instead. However, this wasn't about silently erasing a mark. This was about plausible deniability. He sent his best eye in expecting results, and results was what he got. He had not actually been expecting something concrete for at least 10 days, but it seemed like he was still underrating Clint Barton. Without a doubt, he was S.H.I.E.L.D.'s most capable agent. When he got further confirmation from Natasha on a highly possible lead and a request for immediate extraction, he had immediately greenlighted it. The list she sent him was very interesting, to say the least. A normal man would look at it and call it an elaborate prank, but Fury was far from normal. The world they lived in was hardly normal. He took Natasha's warning and responded appropriately, even going as far as outsourcing it to someone nearby, and he waited. The first thing the team was to do on arrival was to negate the sophisticated signal jammer on the building with one of Stark's trinkets to give him his vision. And that was when everything went wrong. He blinked. The frown on his face slowly receded. He tapped a number on the intercom on his desk and pinged the only person the number was connected to. A few minutes later, someone stepped inside his office and came to a stop in front of his desk. "I'm assuming you know why I called you here?" he asked as he looked at his top agent, Yelena Belova, the Black Widow. Yeah, I already heard," she said with a roll of her eyes. "Whatever you do, steer away from his Brotherhood and the others," Fury said with a dead grim expression, ignoring her frivolous attitude. "All I want to know is who is making a cure for mutants." Like a skipped record, her amusement disappeared in an instant. "Got it." She then turned around to leave. "Miss Belova," Fury called out to her. "I don't have to remind you about the importance of your success, do I?" Her brief pause was the only reply she gave, and Fury accepted the admission. Isaac grumbled as he finished clearing out that particular rabble. He was usually a mild-mannered man, his only passion being his trade, and it was really hard for something to put him in a bad mood outside his trade. He wasn't angry even, he was just irritated. What just happened was not something that would the top 50 times he's been pissed off, but that didn't mean that his mild irritation didn't come with its own reprisal. First of all, those two idiots had goaded his attention and interest into thinking that they were genuinely about to buy something, only for them to suddenly try to kidnap him. His annoyance left him befuddled at the ludicrous thought of trying to kidnap a merchant from their shop. He dealt with both of them easily, obviously, and just when he thought that the irritation and profound disappointment would mellow away with time, a group of some people tried infiltrating his shop. What kind of disrespect was that? The door was literally the last thing they used. 4 of those idiots waltzed in, guns held up, and when they saw him they asked him, rather rudely at that, where the first 2 idiots were, and while he was explaining what happened, wanting them to understand how rudely their friends acted, they suddenly started shouting and disturbing the peace of his shop with their obnoxiously loud guns, so he lashed out, accordingly. He looked at the bouquet of feathers, white goose feathers, sitting inside a small vase at the top of a shelf, and felt that bout of disappointment bubble up as his irritation flared. They were very lucky that he wasn't a stickler for his rules as most of his peers and seniors were. No, that wasn't accurate. He enforced his rules, but unlike most merchants, he did not resort to capital punishment at every little offense. As for these guys, to a lesser degree compared to the first 2, he practically inducted them into the shop, like a forceful free purchase, which was basically kidnapping their entire existence. As long as they remain in the shop, no one would remember them. Their existence before the shop meant nothing, whoever they were before never existed. All they were now was a pair of shiny marbles and a bouquet of feathers. And that was what they would remain until he decided otherwise. He might extract a price from them to let them go, or he might let them go for free if he felt like it, or he might just forget about their existence altogether. If that became the case, then he would just load them off to his agent from the company. With that he pushed them away from his mind. Why couldn't they just buy something off the list? It was leagues better than being denied existence. You know what, maybe it's not such a bad idea, he said with a resigned exhale. It was just his luck that his recent streak of customers were more of the irritating sort. He created a board and carved out the general rules along with a foreboding warning. Come here. He called over one of the floating specters, and when it came over, he grabbed it and fused it with the rule board. He ignored the horrifically evil laugh. The board started cackling and continued his work, overriding some of the shop's rules and activating some of the dormant ones. There, he said to the board after finishing his little task. You're now promoted, how about that? The laughing board became maniacally gleeful at his words as screaming ghost faces started pushing out from the board. Keep the theatrics to a minimum. Don't scare every customer that comes in, only the assholes that start breaking the rules. The tortured faces sank back into the board, but the laughing remained, though with a smaller voice. Isaac looked at the board and frowned. What? You still want me to hang you up, myself? Why, you know what, no problem. He hung the board on the second bend that led to the counter and the bulk of the shop, a place where everyone would see it. Now then, his words fell off as his doorbell rang. Fucking hell. He almost groaned as he heard that familiar gruff voice. What a surprise. Welcome back, he said to Frank Castle as the man made his way over with suspicious and hesitant steps. Honestly, I didn't think you'd return. Me too, Frank replied tersely, stealing a back glance at the rule board behind him. Don't know why the fuck I'm even back here. It's not hard to figure out, Isaac remarked with a shrug, his irritated eyes staring at Frank's depressed ones. So, what will it be this time? Before that, Frank jabbed a finger over his shoulder to point at the rule board. What's that about? Isaac sighed. Some people can't just be civil, so I hung that there to at least warn them before they do anything stupid. Stupid, right? The man said with a tone that was full of reflection. And if they keep being stupid? Isaac gave a half-hearted couldn't-care-less shrug. Hit snooze on their existence like I did the last group of idiots. I might add their soul to my specters, or just outright destroy it. Frank looked at Isaac for a second, a long silent second, and softly exhaled with a soft shake of his head. Give me the shotgun and 10 mags for both it and the pistol, he mulishly ordered. Isaac wordlessly made the gun appear floating in midair in front of Frank, and asked the wary-looking Frank. Anything else? If you don't mind, allow me to recommend 3 things that I think will catch your interest and help you in your extracurriculars. Go ahead. Frank took the gun and held it in different positions to test its balance. He stopped after he was satisfied with the results and regarded Isaac and the 3 new things on the counter. Estus, a magic potion that heals any degree of physical wounds, poisons, and other debilitating ailments. A must-have for those with dangerous occupations. He shifted the glowing bottle to the side and pushed the other two items, a malformed skull mask and a book, an instruction manual, towards Frank to read their descriptions for himself. The Face of Fear, Tales of Majayala mask carved from a malformed, distorted skull. Its hollow eyes seem to stare back, causing shivers in those foolish enough to stare at it. It instills growing fear in foes in a close radius and, depending on the synergic actions of the wearer, has a low chance of instilling paranoia, one of the 4 fears, in foes. Has an even lower chance to cause despair, and a minuscule chance of causing terror, an effect that creates a crippling state in affected foes. It has a negligible chance of causing haunted in affected foes, a state that causes a lasting detrimental mental effect. Asterisk to instill fear, you have to embody it. Every action is a stroke that makes it grow. Price, $9,700. Frank took a deep breath and looked at the last item, which was the weird instruction manual. Shinshin Kairokuryo Karate Complete Combat Manual, Baki, the manual of the perfected fighting style of Dappo Orochi and his adopted son, Katsumi Orochi. A strong-type full-contact combat style that has been honed to its conceivable pinnacle, used by Dappo Orochi, one of the handful of men able to contend with the demon himself, Yujiro Hanma. Only those dedicated to the martial way can tell the true value of this manual, and even then it'll still be lacking. Price, $26,000 to $1 million. He couldn't tell what was special about the fighting manual from the description or why it would be important enough that Isaac recommended it. He was no slouch in fighting, so he doubted he would need a combat manual to teach him how to fight. But then his eyes trailed down to the price tag and confusion seeped in on seeing the weird figures. What's with the price? This particular manual comes with a condition as part of its price. The creator, Dappo Orochi, a 10th Dan Grandmaster, sold it to me on 2 conditions. 1. Whoever buys it will accept him as their martial master. 2. If they manage to achieve a practitioner level in any of the techniques inside the manual within a month, then they will pay the first price. They will be in debt of $1 million if they fail to do so in a month. Isaac's explanation killed any interest Frank would have had in it. It was a debt sink. He scowled at Isaac. Ain't that just a fancy way to get into debt? Thought you dealt in transparency? Isaac blinked, looking genuinely confused. Was I not transparent enough? Oh, you were. Frank scoffed. On how to scam a poor fucker of his soul to whatever the hell you are. Isaac looked at Frank, no smile, no frown, just a neutral look, and Frank saw the look in his eyes. Those eyes could never belong to a young man. Old men didn't have such eyes. Frank, I'm a merchant. Frank's brows creased at that word again, not understanding what it really meant with the way Isaac said it. I only sell things of quality or importance. Instead of wondering if it's a scam, you should instead ask yourself why the full price is such an exorbitant amount. You should be wondering if you can master it quick enough so you can pay for it dirt cheap. Isaac shook his head as the look in his eyes faded away, but Frank spotted the disappointed gleam clearly. It was as if he was looking at a child choosing 5 $1 bills instead of a single $100 bill. He initially only came for the arbitrator shotgun, but he then decided to also get the healing juice and the mask Isaac recommended. Isaac recommended it. Everything Isaac had recommended suited him perfectly. Shit. He looked at the manual again. It looked old and worn out, but it also had the genuine smell to it. You said you know your customers, right? Frank asked, still looking at the manual, his interest growing. I'm a you're a merchant, right? You said that too. Frank picked it up and held it towards the shotgun, the glow juice and the mask. It was as if he could see a synergy between everything Isaac was selling him. You recommended it because you think it'll be perfect for me, right? Basically. Isaac said dryly, but Frank was sure he had a note of amusement somewhere in there. 1 month, right? I'll take it. Frank said with a grim certainty, knowing with full clarity that he just traded with his soul on the line. Perfect. Isaac clapped happily. It was a little weird seeing an adult this excited about making sales in a pawnshop, but Frank didn't let it bother him. The gun, magazines, mask and a pack of a dozen Estes comes to a total of $35,900, without the cost of manual. You can pay for the manual at the end of the 1-month deadline, but if you want to pay the initial cost of the manual now, your new total will be $61,900. Frank grimaced. That was not a small sum. I'll pay for the manual in a month's time. We also offer free delivery services to your door if you are interested. It'll arrive before you get home, Isaac suddenly said while packaging Frank's purchase. Frank's eyes narrowed. And how do you know where I live? Isaac replied offhandedly. I don't. The shop takes care of it, not me. That didn't really placate Frank. If anything, it made him more paranoid. Unfortunately for him, however, it was already established that there was nothing he could do if Isaac wanted to harm him. I'll take it. Well then, have a good day, Frankie. Isaac gave him a 2-finger salute as everything on the counter disappeared with a pop. Frank left the shop and Isaac went back to passing his time by productively waiting for his next customer. Number 31, Chapter 31, Fair Reactions. The X-Mansion, for a building chock full of indigenously blooded teens, stood erect with picture-perfect serenity, proudly proclaiming its structural integrity. Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, a modern-day medieval castle of old estate, was a secret public sanctuary for mutants under the purview of the elderly Charles Francis Xavier, Professor X to those in their circle, and a close-knit group of aides and friends. It was both a sanctuary, a learning place, and a boot camp to the children that grew within its walls, a place that Charles Xavier had built to nurture every young mind that came his way back from his youthful days. So yes, it was a miraculous thing that the old money-looking castle had survived generations of volatile, empowered, adrenaline junkie hormonal teenagers, and it was not for a lack of them trying. Students walked down the hallways with various expressions on their faces, chattering the day away with a sense of safety that eluded most mutants in their day-to-day life. On the topmost floor, in an expansive office room that smelt of aged wood and expensive leather, Charles Xavier and his teachers were having a lightly tense meeting that had become a frequent thing in the last few weeks. Hank McCoy, a blue beast of a man, was currently speaking, or rather repeating the same phrase he had been repeating for the last few weeks. None of them have heard anything about a cure, he said with the bare tremble of an irritated growl. Whatever it is, there has been no mention of it in the medical circle. After the last fiasco, you really think they would let anything slip if they decided to go for an encore? Logan asked sarcastically, leaning against the door with a bottle of beer in hand. Not necessarily, Hank replied and looked at Logan before continuing, but you have to understand, Logan, it's impossibly harder to hide a secret once it comes out. He looked at the others in the room. That is not the case here. Any more or it and I'll start pulling out my hair. The joke at the end got a few chuckles, but it did not distract them from what was slowly becoming an issue. How can we even be sure it's a cure, or even if there is a cure? Warren questioned, letting known his skepticism. He had strong opinions about advertised cures. Not to come across as an insensitive jerk, Logan scoffed, but no one knows anything and yet somehow everyone knows there is a cure. That's what you call a hoax. We don't even know if anyone's truly been cured. Jean and Piotr frowned at that but in the end said nothing. Aurora on the other hand clearly had something to say, but Logan beat her to it. He's not wrong, you know. Logan. She turned to him in surprise. Calm the sparks, woman, he said, knowing fully well she had more control than that. Like it or not, the bird's got a point. Now I don't know about Metal Gear and his rock band, but we have exactly zero evidence to the fact. That is not a reason to stop looking. Scott said as he took the bottle from Logan and took a sip. He frowned at the taste and looked at the brand before handing it back. I'm not saying we should. Logan half-growled as he swiped his bottle from Scott's hand while the latter looked completely unrepentant. Professor? At Aurora's call, they all turned to Charles Xavier, whose wheelchair sat in front of his desk. You've been silent for a while now. Charles sighed. I've heard all what you've been saying. But? Warren asked, causing Charles to sigh again. I fear it's not as simple as we thought. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. One of his fingers was silently drumming on his armrest. Don't keep us in suspense, Professor. Patience, Logan. Logan snorted while Charles gave a genial smile. And yes, as Logan has been so vocal and pointing, there is no evidence that mutants have been cured. Logan smirked, Scott and Piotr remained impassive, while Aurora frowned softly. Only if he wasn't so wrong. Charles chuckled upon seeing the way the smirk drained on his face. Professor. Charles, you're saying? Yes, Henry. Charles leaned into his wheelchair. While I do not know the people who have allegedly been cured, I, however, do know of them. Of their group to be more precise. Postures straightened and shoulders leaned forward at Charles's admission. And who are they? Scott asked. Let's call them an old acquaintance for now. Charles said, slowly feeling the creeping migraine that threatened to hit his skull any time he thought of how his old friend might react to them. They are a rather reclusive gathering. Gathering? They are more a community than they are a group. Hank's brain finally finished its computing, making him blink at the realization. Oh, them. Charles nodded with a wry smile. Seems you finally caught on. The rest of the room noticed the silent exchange between both older men and were curious. They knew of many mutant groups scattered across the country, but Charles's words made it clear that they did not know these people. In other words, old history. Are they trouble? Jean couldn't help but ask upon seeing how both men reluctantly pranced around the topic. Charles looked like he was having trouble with putting out the words. No, not really. It's more complicated than that. Hank scoffed as he adjusted his glasses. To put it bluntly, we will be the ones causing them trouble by having anything to do with them. I don't follow. Aurora's brows furrowed. Hank, who sat on the same sofa with Aurora, pressed his full weight into the furniture. In understating simpler words, they don't deal with other mutants. They keep to themselves. They don't ask anyone for help, or anything of the sort. They don't meddle and they don't cause trouble for others. The entire room was listening to Hank's words as he gave them a very vague introduction into their party of interest. They keep religiously to it and they expect us to do the same. No matter how we flip it, we will be the ones in the wrong. Just for going near them? Warren asked incredulously. Yeah, it's called territory. Seen lots of cases like that up south back in the day. Best thing you can ever do for them is leave them the fuck alone. Logan said as he swallowed the last drop of beer. But I guess we can't really do that now. This is going to stink balls. Crass language aside, I'm afraid Logan is right on both counts. Charles's agreement smoothed out the feathers that were slowly getting rumpled. We can't afford to do nothing or be slow to react. The last 2 times it happened are not lessons to be repeated. So what do we do? Aurora asked. I'm not interested in coming to odds with people that are just trying to live peacefully with themselves, but I also know that gross oversight can make this spiral into something nobody wants. She turned to Charles. Professor, do you have any information that we can use to track down whoever made this cure? We must know the intent behind its creation. If it would be armed by the government, that was the real fear. Every worst thing about a mutant cure was the government's intent with it. They single-handedly made most mutants, even the ones that once used to hope for it, hate the way existence of a mutant cure. A witch hunt had all but started before they and the Brotherhood put a stop to it back in 2005. A way that doesn't involve us coming to butt heads with them, I presume. Charles shook his head dejectedly. I'm afraid not, my dear. He's not going to play the passive role for long, you know. And wasn't that the truth? Warren's concern was a fact none of them could overlook. Magneto was a very patient man when he wanted to be, but he was in no way passive. And neither can we. Scott added. The situation is delicate enough without anyone applying pressure. We don't even know who else is interested in this supposed cure. They have to find a way to leak out the pressure or else they'll implode. It wasn't just them and the Brotherhood that were interested in the cure. Subtracting the long list of countries who would want this as an avenue of control, Charles could list over 20 shadowy organizations that would be interested in getting their hands on this cure, and not for anything good. While I agree with a lot of what you've said, I'm afraid that any choice we make will only feed escalation. Can we at least talk to them? Jean asked softly. That is the entire point they keep trying to make. They don't want to interact with outsiders. The mutant doctor's frustration was visible through his blue fur. This is becoming much more troublesome than it is worth. If it was simply about a cure, then they wouldn't have such striking opinions about it. Even if they personally wouldn't take it, they knew that those sentiments were not shared by every mutant. The secrecy of the whole thing casted a bigger shadow of doubt on it. Hey Prof, can't we get an in from your tattletale? Logan asked. I'm afraid it's not something that simple, but I'll try. If nothing else, I'll try to get us a heads up before anything serious goes down. You mean Ferrofomo? I mean anyone who's remotely interested in this as we are. Charles looked at the old clock on the wall and clapped his hands. I'm afraid we'll be stopping here for now. I believe my class is about to start. With that he rolled out of his office, followed closely by Hank and Scott. Good news is we are no longer chasing flying ducks. The bad news is that the situation has gotten worse. Warren groaned. We just can't seem to catch a break. The rest of them stood up and slowly filtered out of the office with different thoughts going through their mind. What are you thinking about, Ororo? Jean asked softly as she came up behind her. It's nothing. Ororo deflected half-heartedly. But I guess this has been getting to me more so than I realize. Oh no, I'm not I know that's not what you meant, Jean. Ororo said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. I guess. I'm worried. Jean had a look of realization hit her. About the cure. About those taking it? Ororo shook her head as they arrived at the general area. They both stood by the pillar as they watched some of the students relax, while some hurried to their classes. About the circumstances. Ororo confessed. And with that Jean finally understood what was bothering her former teacher. You think it's something bad, and that they are being exploited. The fiery-haired young woman sighed and leaned against the pillar. That's what everyone is thinking, even Pyotr, even if he doesn't say it. What if we are wrong? What if it's not as bad as we think? Maybe it's a good thing. Ororo chuckled, a battered sound that was bereft of humor. That is what we all hope for. Except that the fact that we're here shows just how far we are from something good. Jean was about to say something but stopped herself when a gaggle of students passed by and greeted them. Frau Jean, Frau Ororo, Kurt's greetings gave them a healthy surprise that soon had them sporting small smiles. Guten Morgen. Oh? Ororo's amusement grew. You look to be in an ecstatic mood, Kurt. A good day, all. Kurt said heartily as he joined his group of friends, still in his infectious mood. What is up with him? Ororo asked with jovial curiosity. Jean gestured to a group of girls. I think it's because of the gift Yukio and Ellie got him. His joy was practically broadcasted throughout the mansion when he got it. I see. That's good. Ororo nodded. Looking at Kurt made the girl's gift and getting scolded by Logan worth it, a sentiment she was sure they shared. She turned to Jean and saw her staring in Kurt's direction while her face gained that thoughtful look she had when something teased her attention. What is it? I don't know. Jean said. Where did they get that cross for him? From a pawnshop in town. Why? Is something wrong with it? Ororo's brows furrowed lightly but eased up when Jean shook her head. Sorry, it's nothing. Jean assured her. Maybe the situation is getting to me after all. I think I need some relaxation time. Don't we all? Ororo mused. Unfortunately, their line of work rarely afforded them such luxuries. Number 32 Chapter 32 The Merchant Entertains Curious Teens. The last month or two had been a radical transformation period for the Morlocks, and while it could be agreed that quite some time has passed and they should have gotten used to it, the Morlocks had been in such a special case of poverty for so long, a few years for their youngest/newest members, and decades for the oldest, that they were still in their honeymoon phase for how drastically their lives had changed. Swaths of clothes, warm blankets, and even mattresses for some, crystal clear clean water, rounds of nutritious meals, fresh air from the purifiers, upgraded security, internet access, and snacks. They now had occasional snacks. And the biggest difference was the new avenue of freedom for those who chose to do away with their mutation. Because unlike what the media and public opinion might lead one to believe, not all mutants could control people or make cars fly with their minds. Not all of them could sneak into the White House and hold the president hostage. Being a close-knit community, they knew who and who had the most threatening mutations, and with special recommendations from their resident doctor, those people were advised to sell their mutations. In most cases they didn't even need the persuasion. The appeal to finally live as a normal human being was sufficient enough for them. It did not need to be said that some of them decided they wanted to live above ground, and Callisto kept to her word and let them leave, without their memories. All in all, they were living pretty good lives. But like the rules of the universe stated, no good thing lasts forever. Their relative safety bubble was unfortunately a very important topic among groups that should have otherwise not been interested. While most interested parties were content enough to watch from the sidelines for now, the same could not be said for those whom the Morlocks' decisions, or lack thereof, affected. Callisto was aware of the growing interest, but what she was not aware of was the scale. She knew the significance of a cure to the mutant community, but what she did not want was for the Morlocks to be at the spotlight for it. That was also why she did not outright tell Mystique where to go for answers. If she had, some way or somehow, statements like "the Morlocks were the first to get cured, the ones who made the shop known were a group of reclusive mutants, a group of mutants that live in the underground sewers, got to him first," would start flying around within the first month because everyone loved the narrative. They wouldn't want to put themselves in the spotlight when it eventually escalates. It was a stupid, curvaceous, and illogical way of thinking, yes, but it was what convinced Callisto that she was right. Power groups, mutants and non-mutants, were all the same. What she was doing by remaining mum and ignorant was not a stopgap method that would ensure the Morlocks remain unscathed, but it made its effect by showing others just how detached they were from the whole thing. It wasn't exactly a logical thought, a bit naive and baseless, but when has power struggles ever been logical? She wasn't stupid enough to think that she could go against Magneto if he really wanted to strong-arm her compliance. She could resist all she wanted, she would, but that did not ensure everyone's safety. Magneto and his propaganda of never hurting mutants could kiss her tush ass. The situation is getting worse. They don't know what is going on, but they can feel it. Are you sure this is the best way to go about it? Mikhail came up behind her and asked. He was an intimidating mass of a man, but Callisto just couldn't see it. Oh, she knew that he was more powerful than her. After all, she still remembered her intimate defeat, but she just couldn't see the danger. Probably why he's more dangerous than he feels. Right now, all his powerful frame radiated was concern for the other Morlocks. Whether it was because of his strength or morality, there was a competence about him that granted him the luxury to always worry about others before himself. It was a good trait to have for someone that was looking after her Morlocks. How long is this going to go on for? He inquired while looking at her with a chiding frown. What are you trying to accomplish? Unfortunately, despite his staunch morals, he was a little naive in how much he trusted people. Trusting Magneto just because he was a mutant and was also the loudest mutant voice up there was a fool's mistake. What else? She scoffed derisively. To make sure they all come out unscathed out of this. Then why not just tell them and get this over with? Isaac wouldn't mind. Her scowl deepened. I don't give two shits about the shop owner. She turned to him, one of her few displeasures about him showing on her face. If I told Magneto right now where to go, do you think he'll tell everyone else interested? Mikhail mirrored her frown, but his was consternation as opposed to her disdain. If I told him what he wants, do you think he would be so generous as to tell everyone else what he knows? Her question left Mikhail stumped. A scenario was slowly forming in his head, but Callisto did not let him have that mercy. And what do you think will happen then? When he probably asks, orders, us not to tell anyone else, she dug deeper into his naivete with spades of sheer mockery. What will happen when everyone finally gets tired of being left out and they decide to copy Magneto? What do we do then? And what if it's government spooks? Maybe that's when we'll finally stand our ground and tell them no. And who knows, maybe they will take no for an answer after we've given yes to everyone else. Her voice at the end had lost its cutting edge and had gained a soft and encouraging melody that amplified the disgust and mockery tenfold. You don't think? She scoffed. There's no mutant messiah out there. There's no chosen one. There are good people and bad people, but there's no one who's appointed to save mutant kind. She turned over and watched as the camp survived slowly. It's ironic. Every time you hear mutants everywhere, even you, cry out that we're humans too, and then you conveniently forget that mutants are humans too. We're every bit as evil and self-serving as them. Her eyes spun haphazardly under the cloth, capturing every corner of their underground haven. Truly a useful thing to have. The eye was a magical thing, and so was the wrap of cloth that fed it trickles of magic, but with the eye connected to her head, by being inside her eye socket, it had the added effect of effusing trickles of mana into her brain and slightly boosting every perceptive organ, enhancing her already superhuman sight, smell, taste and hearing. You are a fool to think that they would put us before their ambitions. Mutant or not. Even if she closed her eyes, she could make out vague shapes of everyone in the camp in her head. All her senses were being juiced, and they were working overtime to send out and interpret information 5 times faster. She had already gotten used to her newly acquired echolocation ability, and while it was great, it wasn't the best thing she had discovered. She had to hand it to Isaac because he knew what he was doing when he recommended the eye to her. Not only was the eye being boosted by her own superhuman sensory capabilities and sustained by the magic cloth, she had recently found out that the eye was some sort of focus/siphon and could actually use it to drain her other sensory abilities and use it to boost the eye to ridiculous levels. She once tried it and drained her hearing and sense of taste to half of their capabilities and found that not only was her vision strengthened, like being able to zoom into bloodstreams, her range skyrocketed so ridiculous that she could perfectly see what was happening above ground halfway across the city. That was an incredible ability to have, despite the drawback on her other senses, but that wasn't all she could do. With 2 of her senses drained halfway, the so-called Mad Moody's eye was boosted to the point that she could now make visual predictions of people's next moves by focusing on the microcontractions that were all over their body, which she could now see with perfect clarity. She was already a great marksman, but now it was impossible for her to miss when she could zoom in on her target and even see wind currents. If she was a great fighter before then, she was outright scary now, as Mikhail had so dutifully proven in the last mock battle she coaxed out of him. And all that came from draining 2 of her senses halfway. She doubted she would have been able to do this if her heightened sensory abilities weren't part of her mutation. When she added her sense of smell and drained 3 of them, it wasn't that shocking when she discovered just how slowly everything was moving. Her brain was processing information so fast that every motion to her eyes appeared sluggish. She didn't experiment with what would happen if she drained them fully, not because she was cautious but because of the drawback. Their resident doctor had explained it as doping or juicing up her brain power, and that the migraines were because of the unnatural enhancements. Her enhanced recovery dealt with the worst of it, so it wasn't that serious a drawback, more like a literal headache. As for her little dagger, well, she had yet to see what it couldn't slice through. A single slash with enough heat turned reinforced steel to molten slag. The dagger was simply a cute wonder work. So what? We just wait for them to tire themselves out of their hospitality? Mikhail breathed hard for a moment. His muscles were coiled tight like a trapdoor while his expression settled hard like cooled glass. She snorted, either because of Mikhail's words or because of the hapless kid that tripped on himself down below. It's a normal store in Queens. Who knows, maybe they'll find it without us getting into the mix. That would be setting them against Isaac. Mikhail pointed out. And? She asked genuinely. You think Isaac is strong enough to say no? Callisto shrugged nonchalantly. Either way, I don't care. As long as it had nothing to do with us. She shifted a bit and glanced at him with half-lidded eyes. Do you think he's strong enough? Isaac frowned as the sneeze came in and left halfway, leaving his nostrils itchy and unfulfilled. Looks like someone was asking rhetorics about him. Is the weather getting to you too, Mr. Isaac? Kitty Pryde looked up in concern from where she was looking through a collection of crowns. Nah, I'm fine. Someone's probably asking questions about me, Isaac said easily as he reclined on his chair while the group of teens wandered around his store. A few chuckled at his reply but nevertheless kept going through whatever caught their eye. As for why the gaggle of kids were over at his store, apparently, Ellie had let it slip that he got some pretty cool retro stuff and that had let them take permission from their boarding school to check out his store. Whoa! Every now and then reactions like that would ring out from different areas of his shop. That's a knight's armor. It's the genuine thing, Kurt softly exclaimed, drawing the attention of Evan, Bobby and Ellie to the muted red and gold armor that spotted roaring lions on its spalders. Sick. Evan gaped in shock and wonder. How does someone even get their hands on something like this? How come this is even in a pawn shop? How did you get a full knight's armor, Isaac? Ellie looked over to where Isaac was reclining while throwing nuts into his mouth and asked. Isaac couldn't see the armor they were talking about but he knew which armor they were looking at. Got it from a knight in exchange for a way to save his life. Even got it for cheap. It only cost me a strong horse and a satchel full of food. He narrated half-heartedly as he popped another nut into his mouth. It was one of my easiest acquisitions from that area. The look of confusion that was growing on their faces swiftly into frustration. Come on man, you don't have to lie about everything just because we ask, you know. Evan grumbled in dissatisfaction as their inquiry was once again swindled. I don't lie, kid, least of all about my wares. His offhand remark was met with rolling eyes and other forms of sarcastic comments. I can't even lie since they are all impressive. How did you even get the money to buy all this? They might have cost some serious dough. Bobby echoed his afterthought, earning dazed nods from the others as they walked past the rack of medieval weapons. Why even open a pawn shop? Couldn't you dunno, auction them online instead of stressing yourself with a pawn shop? Isaac's reaction was an amused scoff. You wouldn't understand the business, kid. Yukio and Rogue came out from another corner of the shop after checking out different types of garments that felt magical to the fingers. Those garments were like magic. How did you even get things like that? Yukio exclaimed in childish excitement and even Rogue mirrored her expression, but in a more repressed and dull way. Isaac chuckled. I've got a lot of things, kid. Trust me when I say I've got pretty much anything you'd want. No matter how outrageous. It was clear that they didn't really believe his boastful claims but that didn't stop their excitement as they sated their teenage curiosity. Whatever you do, don't open those magic books at the back. Isaac reminded them as he swerved to the left to catch a stray shot with his mouth. Is that a freaking cannon blaster? Number 33 Chapter 33 A merchant always chased the profit, that was the basis on which all trade was carried out. Whether it was profit in gaining an object or service in exchange for one's monetary tokens, or profit in monetary value by selling an object or service, profit was the lifeblood of the trade. Merchants were the living embodiment of this concept, as they were to anything that concerned the trade. There was always profit to be had in every interaction between a merchant and a customer, and it was a responsibility of both parties, more so the merchant, to come out of every trade as the more profitable party. A customer with enough money and a laissez-faire attitude towards money, in a way, profited more in every purchase because of their low regards to money. The concept of profits in such cases are extremely subjective, not because of the customer's finances, but because of the nature of the merchant themselves. The very concept of profit was the real currency they earned and it was what they used in trading within the Union. It was because of this that merchants had zero regards towards the money they received in their trades, this as well as another reason. Quotas. Quotas are the first thing that all merchants receive every time they set down shop. For younger merchants that were just starting out, completing their quotas was both hard and extremely important as it was their literal lifeline. It dictated everything they did. From volumes that had to be sold within time limits, measure of impact their goods had in wherever they found themselves in, increase in capital for their next stockpiling, and the most important of all, merchant benefits, their advancements, employment, and lifespan depended on completing their list of quota within the time limits. Older merchants had an easier time completing their quotas either because of the slew of perks their acquired benefits granted them, a wider array of goods, or simply due to their expertise and business strategies they'd perfected in their long trade. How fast they completed their quota and the total amount of goods they sold after every trading session, the value of every antique piece acquired/resold as well as the impact their goods had in that dimension, all contributed to how much profit they made. Profits which were then used to purchase benefits. There were also the leadership boards and milestone bonuses that rewarded them with every advancement they made. As for their wealth of profits, or Union gold coins when processed into their physical forms, they without a doubt spent the bulk of it on themselves and their shops. Larger inventory, larger interior space, perfect ventilation, protection services, mental, physical, magic, spiritual, anti-espionage, shop autonomy, support services, extended quota time, reduced quota, side hustle licenses, trade perception, repair services, quality refresh. These were some of the few things that merchants could purchase for the shops with their profits, and they all came in tiers, Tier 1, Tier 10, with each tier costing at least a 10-fold multiplier from the last. It wouldn't be a trade union if the union did not find ways to drain their merchants from their hard-earned profits. The services and the tier upgrades were so costly that those that had a Tier 5 across their services were considered legendary merchants. The highest Isaac had seen were two of his old seniors who had Tier 8 services, and they were pretty much considered myths in the Union. They were so old that half of the Union did not know of them, not even as a rumor, and the other half who knew of them did not even know their names, talk less of having ever seen them. The Union was so tight-gripped with their coins that every upgrade from Tier 3 required at least half to a dozen trade sessions. And these were just for shop services and perks. As for the true personal merchant bonuses, there were services and trait perks like trade talent, which granted the merchant a boosted talent ceiling, and which also required trade and side hustle licenses for every single trade talent they wanted to buy: body talent, soul talent, magic talent, martial talent, perception up, treasure scouter, price tag, social clues, ability traits and whatnots from the endless list of tempting options. Like with the shop services, they also came in a division of 10 tiers. Things like the trade, martial and magic talent were completely unnecessary if the merchant felt like their natural talent was up to par. They would still need the trade and side hustle licenses to ply the trade in their shop, but natural talent also had a ceiling, which was where the higher talent tiers came in play. While upgrading talent and trait perks were cheaper than shop services, the usual long list of choice picks made getting enough Union coins to buy and upgrade them just as hard as shop services time-wise. In Isaac's case, he stuck to the generous advice he was given and focused singularly on upgrading the necessary and important shop services for such a ridiculous amount of time that he practically forgot about everything else. For a very, very long time, he remained a tragically weak merchant, but he never really noticed as he had made it a habit of staying put inside his shop for whatever duration of time he kept his market open for. It was a common sentiment that merchants rarely involved themselves in violence, so much so that it was common practice to invest a lot in exit strategies. Because he took the longer route of focusing on his shop instead of anything else, he inevitably ended up choosing the harder route of naturally learning about different trade services to pass time instead of just buying the necessary service tier. He also saved up a lot on talent and traits as he inevitably picked them up on the way to pass the familiar monotonous boredom. When he finally decided to stop upgrading his shop services and finally focus on his talents and trait perks, he found out that he had unknowingly picked up a good number of them and had raised them to respectable tiers without ever spending a single coin on them. The only price he had to pay for this was a frankly ridiculous amount of time, even by veteran merchant standards. However, time was the one thing capable merchants never worried about. In other words, in his eyes, everything he had accomplished was a grand profit. He had paid off the humongous expenses of numerous traits and talents with a practically free resource, time. What else was proof of his merchant status than this? Honestly, his only problem nowadays, other than stocking up his inventory, was figuring out which type of shop he wanted to open up. He could open up a multi-purpose shop that attended to his list of different trade services, but he never liked that option. His basic strategy was knowing what kind of dimension he was assigned to and opening up a theme shop that was suitable for it. He could only do this because, unlike most merchants, he had a lot of options in high-level trade services and a sea of items that filled up every trade level. It is useless getting a high service tier if the merchant lacks the inventory of things he can trade at that level. The rate of successful trades impacted a merchant's profits, so too many failed trades, due to either lacking the necessary item despite having the service tier, or because of the customer's limited finances, affected their overall profits. Take Isaac's current dimension for example, a 21st century Earth with fair advancements and a very minor enhanced population. Their magic community, which was hardly a notable population, was effectively hidden and practically non-existent. He couldn't cater fully to their magic communities with how reclusive they were, and he could hardly cater high-level techs to the normal population because they lacked the financial buoyancy, so he decided on a mismatch approach for the mismatched dimension, a pawnshop that was likely to deal in everything. Every decision he made was taken with maximum profits in mind. If there was anything he was addicted to, then no doubt it was the feeling of setting new profit margins. It hardly bothered him anymore if he didn't sell more of the truly interesting things in his shop, as long as a trade was had and profits were made. He groggily blinked away the sleep from his tired eyes as the shop alerted him of a customer, which was enough to banish his dizzy spell. He was slightly surprised when the identity of the customer registered in his head. He had doubted he would be seeing her again after the last time. What a surprise. "I honestly thought I wouldn't be seeing you again," he said as much as the bald woman garbed in robes came into view. "So did I," the Ancient One replied with a helpless shrug that seemed to say, "What can I do?" She slowly took note of the new arrangements in the shop, the new items on display and the extra walking space it afforded, without losing its pawnshop atmosphere, and finally stopped at the rule board. "Did that really become necessary?" she asked curiously. Isaac scoffed, but it came out as a half-laugh. "You don't even know half of it. It's like they were annoying me just so that I would have to put it up." She didn't sympathize with him, but she understood. "Quite so." Isaac smiled at her, the same exact type of smile he gave her the last time she came here. It was the type of smile that was waiting at the punchline for the joke to catch up. The classic customer service smile. "And what good deals have you brought for us this afternoon?" Isaac waved his hand and cleared off the few items that were on top of his counter. One of her brows raised at him. "And what makes you think I'm bringing a deal?" Isaac took off his glasses and started cleaning it with a handkerchief he pulled out of thin air. "I have quite the nose for things like these." He adjusted his glasses until it sat perfectly on the ridge of his nose. "You don't look like the kind of person that is easily tempted, which means you won't be drawn back here by any magical trinket I have. You however look like the kind of person that will flush an infinity stone down the drain, as long as you know where the shit goes." "Fair assumption," she replied offhandedly, neither confirming nor denying the claims, looking calm and detached from the whole thing. "Of course, I could also be wrong," Isaac added jokingly. He was looking at the Ancient One expectantly as if he could smell some kind of treasure on her person. "So what brings you here today?" Her sigh was barely audible. She reached into her robes and pulled out a book. "Do you have barrier techniques or artifacts that repel possession? From obscure schools of magic if you can." "Oh ho!" Isaac smiled conspiratorially as he left the counter, with her following behind him. "Magical subterfuge, how exciting. So what's the play?" He came to a stop before one of the bookshelves, one that was forbidden magic-free, and started sifting through them with one hand. "Trying to hide your involvement, or just stocking up on trump cards?" "To confuse," she answered. Kamartaj had tons of barrier techniques and possession-repelling charms, but she didn't go for them because it would have been too convenient. She wanted something entirely unexpected. Something that would truly stop them in their tracks for a moment. It doesn't need to be overly powerful. She didn't want to be second-guessing every move she made when she finally decided to take action. Her new lease on life had rejuvenated her cautiousness, and this time she was heeding it to the fullness of her abilities. Standard spells, while they would work, would be highly ineffective, and they would have prepared for whatever spells she would resort to. Regardless of whatever contingency they had prepared for, she would take that chance and completely destroy it with what they would never expect. Yup, this would do. He pulled out a smaller bind of paper with a smirk on his face that sat between amusement and anticipation. And we just need, these guys will do. He grabbed a bundle of talismans and handed her the book as they returned to his counter. Zenin Clan's Rudimentary Barrier Techniques, Jujutsu Case, in a book detailing the Zenin Clan's fundamental methods of erecting veils. It also includes how to make imprints into the barrier, similar to the basic principles of making binding vows, acting as rules or exceptions to the erected curtain. She gave a cursory flip through the pages and had her interest suitably piqued. Jujutsu. That explains the traditional aspect of it. Though the act of fueling it with the intense and erratic magic tainted by negative emotions is novel, I can't help but find it inefficient and corralled. But maybe that's why it works. It will be an interesting read either way. Her brows raised at how Isaac's smile grew at her vocal interest. The man said nothing and just gave her the talismans. Sealing talismans, Jujutsu Case, in a bundle of sealing talismans that seals the cursed energy and movement of cursed spirits and curse users. It also coin flips as repelling seals that are highly effective against possession. Just slap them on the poor sucker and you are good to go. Will that be enough? She pointed at the book she gave him, making him nod and wave her off. It just barely covers it. He made the book disappear and settled down into his chair. Oh, and if you're curious about knowing more about jujitsu, bring something with a little more kick to it. Trust me, it's worth it. So that was the reason behind his happy smile when she showed her interest. He gave her what she needed, but he also made sure that it was something unique enough to draw her attention to buy more. He wanted her as a repeat customer. She shrugged as she left. It was the tamest thing an extra-dimensional being could do. Number 34, Chapter 34, Uprooting the Whole Thing. Frank Castle's life for the past months was in a constant segue flow, from one escalating event to another, and he had found that, unsurprisingly, he wholly preferred it that way. It kept the nightmares and the voices away at night, and during the day, after whatever small amount of sleep he could get, he busied himself with practicing the really strange fighting manual he had bought from a wayward barter. He spared himself 4 to 5 hours of sleep at most and spent every waking moment by busying himself with one thing or the other. He could not afford to stop moving for various reasons. And he was currently living that philosophy. A casual repositioning of his shoulder made the trembling grunt's bullet sail harmlessly by. Frank remained calm even as the frightened little shit fired 2 more shots that were way off target. The idiot stumbled to the ground as he tried to run and began begging for his worthless life, but quickly had his irritating sniveling terminated by the bullet that went into one of his eye sockets. The effect of the mask, the face of fear, was a pleasant and compounding surprise even with him having read what it could do. He was never inclined to magic and other mojo chicken shit, a man who very much preferred his cold weapons and lead, so while he was fairly interested in what it could do, he was comfortably skeptical of its potency. Fair to say that he had greatly underestimated what the gnarly piece of bone could do, or what it made people do to be specific. He, more than most, knew the power of a solid reputation. He knew men from enemy lines who by just the utterance of their names would send cold sweat down the spines of baptized veterans. The mask had made him that person. All it took was 2 weeks of constant night sweeps, and now, when the first goon from the warehouse he was raiding saw him, Frank saw clearly as whatever fighting spirit he had die a quick death. The single recognition of the mask drowned him in despair. The Punisher. Ghostface. The Black One. They were calling him a bunch of names, each one vividly showing the impression he'd made in the city's underbelly. The warehouse was already a buzz of panicking activity by the time he shot down the door. The first thing he did, besides steering clear of the hail of bullets, was to ricochet off some bullets to take out every light source in the warehouse and then use a gas round to floor the whole place. His breathing, which was normally calm and silent, especially since he hadn't done anything strenuous, started coming out of the mask in a raspy shrill. He had found out that the more disconcerted the enemies became, the louder the breathing became, that he could sometimes hear it clearly in his head over the noise of gunshots. It had worried him that the loud horror breathing would impede his focus and make them easily track his position, but not only was that not the case, the breathing somehow cleared his head and increased his natural alertness, that he could sometimes pick up on a weird nauseous scent that always seemed to lead to some shivering idiot. He still had a hard time accurately tracking the scent, but he was certain that he was getting better at it, as weird as that sounded. The second thing he unintentionally discovered about the clicking-clacking breathing noise the mask produced was that the louder it became, the harder it was for them to tell his position, because apparently they were hearing it from every direction. He never would have known about it if the scared gang members he took down the previous week weren't yelling about it as they huddled up back to back. Frank had a lot of weapons in his arsenal, most prized of which were the lawgiver and the arbitrator, but fear, raw fear, was what he weaponized the most. Criminals scared to come out at night, drugs and weapons trade being more discreet or coming to a brief pause, crime lords pulling back their goons to consolidate their power, protection, that was fear. Fear was who he was slowly becoming. Even now, deep in the spines of the screams and angry shouts, he could smell it bubbling. He could almost see it through the gas. He violently cocked the arbitrator and triggered the heat-seeking mode and held the shotgun steady in his sights. He traced the stray bullet's path and muzzled down the direction and waited for silent beep from the gun that indicated a locked target. There was no smile on his face as his finger pulled steady on the trigger, kicking the second symphony of death into action. The shouting increased and all it did was streamline his focus to needlepoint. He repeatedly switched between the heat seeker and the standard multi-target shell with masterful efficiency. He did not question how he heard someone stringing the pin off a grenade on the rafters above, as he simply pulled out lawgiver and shot the grenade through the rafters. It wasn't simply the mask, he could tell. His body was changing somehow, his senses were getting sharper, and he could only think of one other thing that could have caused it. He ignored the overhead explosion as he focused on systemically decimating everyone involved in this gun trade. It did not take long before the warehouse became as silent as a graveyard, save for some grunting and moaning from the two people he had purposely kept alive. He strapped the shotgun to his back and picked up an axe from the ground, lawgiver on the other hand, as he came to the first man who was desperately trying to crawl away from him. He kicked the man over to his back and let the axe slip down his hand. Name? He briefly wondered how exactly he sounded to man given how his face whitened. The man was already dead, they both knew that, but he could see the flicker of defiance in his eyes. The bravado of a dead man, how utterly inconsequential. You're dead, ghost. Do, know who, pissed off. Name? The axe dug into the ground, straight through the arm. Fuck, why you? The man managed a bloody smile before he expired. Frank remained dead calm as his head rose from the body to meet the eyes of the last survivor, who froze in terror as soon as he met his gaze. Please man, I only did what I was told. I don't have shit to do with any of this. Frank was not moved by the snot and tears on the man's crying face as he moved towards him. Name? Kingpin. Kingpin. The man shouted as the bloody axe dangled near his face. It was a simple gun deal with the carbone. I swear, that's all I know. Why the guns? The axe flexed, some new guns hit the market, ghost marks, everyone's looking for who made them. Kingpin and the Carbone family cut a deal for him to deliver some guns. I don't know what's in Carbone's end. That's everything I know, man. The mask kept staring at the man's face, draining whatever confidence had been building up. He also put out a hit on you. He stuttered. That's all I know, man. He drilled a hole into the man's head. I know. He sighed as a quiet wave fell on the warehouse. He looked at the crate of guns and couldn't help but feel relieved that none of them were Isaac's signature weapons. He was certain that he had killed off every direct link to Isaac's shop, but he couldn't be sure. There was no new word about anyone getting their hands on those guns as far as he was aware. Even if the damned shopkeeper knew what people were doing with the things he sold them, Frank knew that the man/demon/whatever would not care in the slightest. He put it at the back of his mind that the month-end deadline was just around the corner, and even if he felt he had done well with the manual, he didn't put all his trust in his own perception. There was a good reason why he was steadfast in hitting trade points, warehouses and stash houses this month. He only trusted Isaac when it came to the quality of his weapons, that was it. If he could, he would have put a bullet between the smug bastard's eyes. Aurora Monroe was feeling quite under the weather, as Logan had so eloquently put it, and it had taken her a few weeks to know just under her skin it had gotten. One mistaken flare of her temper, just a slight irritation that she'd felt in a moment of tired frustration, was all it took to remind her of who she was. Stormbringer, Magneto had called her that years ago during a particular harsh clash with his Brotherhood. She had fought the man herself, and it was that fight that her respect for the man solidified. Even though they were enemies, the words he had for her were both grounding and helpful. "You're not like me and Charles, Aurora. We learn to keep our stronger feelings contained." He was floating under a harsh thunderstorm, not caring of drawing the dancing lightning to the horde of metals he weaved around him. You make yours hang over our heads, and yet those below remain in perfect calm. What magnificent control. Back then she had been young, headstrong and proud, and his words had been one of those badges she silently carried in her heart, but she had misunderstood what he meant until years later, when the government started touting about cures and regulations. She had been hypocritical and insensitive, fighting against the notion with every mile of her strength and voice, stupidly believing that they had the moral high ground. She had made a stupid mistake, Charles had told her so, same with Logan and Scott, and same with Magneto, a mistake that would have spiraled everything into a greater disaster had her peers not rushed in to stop Magneto from wielding her mistake as his weapon. She had learned from it, grown from it, and was better off from it, but lately it felt like everything that happened back then was repeating itself. She had heard some of the students whispering to themselves when they believed no one was listening, and she couldn't fault them for it. Regardless of how good they had it compared to other mutants, most of the students just wished they could be normal and return to their families. A chilly breeze blew up as she sighed under her breath and looked up when a drop of water touched her cheek. She took a second to make sure that it wasn't her, and when she did, she discreetly used her powers to delay the building shower for a few minutes. Aurora had been looking for something to do to clear her head when her nephew, Evan, had basically told her to check out the little pawnshop he and his friends liked to hang out in because of rare plants he was sure she'd like. She wasn't really interested because she doubted that a pawnshop could acquire supposedly rare plants and that the shopkeeper was dutiful enough to take care of them. She hadn't seen anything of the such the one time she went there. Granted, she was more focused on the girls than the authenticity of what was sold there. Aurora was hardly a judgmental or stereotypical person, that much she could say, but she also knew that reputations did not materialize from thin air. The unpleasant reputation of New York City and pawnshops was something she wholeheartedly believed. Still, she was out in the city by herself for some mental detox and had no particular destination in mind, so with no better options available, she decided to wander around and keep an eye out for that particular shop, since she could hardly remember the exact directions. Surprisingly, she did not have to aimlessly wander long because she came across the familiar road that led to the shop. A few minutes saw her at the front door of the pawnshop, so she walked in. Right. The main reason the shop had even remained in her memory was because of the uncharacteristic fresh air inside the shop. Natural fresh air at that, she could tell. Her gaze swerved to her side and landed on a lacquered box, making her frown a little. She could have sworn she felt a gaze from that direction. She shook her head dejectedly. This was really getting to her. "Can I help you, miss?" She heard a voice behind her and turned to see the shopkeeper, Isaac she recalled, holding a guitar in his hands that he was going to hang up. "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there." "Don't sweat it," the man said as he lowered the guitar to pay more attention to her. "So, can I get you anything? Or you can go ahead and look over for anything you might like, if you want." Well, he was polite and courteous, which was more than Aurora could say for some of the pawnbrokers she'd met. She opened her mouth to reply, but something caught her attention from the corner of her eyes. "Is that a real plant?" He followed the pointing finger and nodded. He walked towards the cabinet near the window and picked up the small flower pot that held a beautiful blue spider lily. Blue spider lily. He might have seen the skeptic look on her face because he pushed the pot to her with a smile on his face. Here. She took it and caressed the beautiful petals, gasping softly when she felt the trickles of life inside it. She had thought it was a red lily-colored blue for aesthetics, but it wasn't. She also thought it was an electric blue spider lily, but she dismissed it instantly because the stem and the petals were different. Even the shade of blue was perhaps the darkest and most vibrant blue she had ever seen in a flower. It was completely blue with no hint of discoloration. "Where did you get this?" she asked with poorly hidden curiosity and interest. She had never seen or heard of a plant like this. "From a mountain. The woman who lived there was kind enough to part with some of it for me. Apparently I was lucky because it just so happened to be the time when they were in bloom," the man explained as he picked up and before glancing back at her. "I have some pretty weird plants if you're interested." She was interested. It was a good way to take her mind off things. "And do you mind keeping that by the window when you're done?"